Hey there, Justin Thomas James here to tell you a little bit about this audiobook that we have on YouTube and this YouTube channel. We're going to be releasing audiobooks, full-length audiobooks. The reason that we want to do this is because we believe that audiobooks should be more accessible. First of all, we don't want to put audiobooks behind a paywall, and as you'll see, if you go to the Sound Booth app, you'll see there's no subscriptions. We want to draw attention to some of the audiobooks that maybe don't have the same momentum on Audible or on our platform that we want to bring to the awareness of more story lovers and listeners like yourself. What you're about to hear is The Wayward Bard, World of Chains, Book 1 by Lars M. One of the things that I think is special about this production is that when Jeff reached out to me and said he wanted me to produce this, he said, okay, you can have this one, but you're going to need to find a violinist because the main character plays the violin and we want that in the background as he's playing. So I reached out to my friend Michelle, who is an absolutely astounding violin player, plays in orchestras in Toronto and all over, and she agreed. And so now in the finished productions of World of Chains books, you're going to hear Michelle's violin playing in the background, and I think that's really cool. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to be releasing roughly 3 hours of this audiobook every Monday until the audiobook is done. That should take about 4 weeks. If you are an audiobook binger, we know you're out there, we love you, we really appreciate how much you listen to our titles. We want to set you up because this plan of releasing, 3 hours every week, that might not be so much fun for an audiobook binger. So here's what we've decided to do. If you want to listen to this audiobook in its entirety right now, you can head on down to the description where you'll find a code for the Sound Booth app that will give you 80% off the entire audiobook. So if you are the type of person who really wants to listen all at once, then head on down to the description and get that code. And that's it from me, everybody. Without further ado, here is The Wayward Bard by Lars M. Sound Booth Theatre and Spoken Realms present The Wayward Bard, World of Chains, Book 1, written by Lars M., narrated by Justin Thomas James. Featuring Laurie Catherine Winkel as Daria, Mrs. Bertinga, and the rest of the female cast, and Jeff Hayes as Gillum Drizzlefog, Greg, and other supporting characters. Chapter 1. Up the Creek. Running for my life. They do say that you should strive to have at least one new experience every day, and this was a new one for me. As I was tumbling down the aisle from my office cubicle, a couple of things were apparent. 1. Fearing for your life truly sharpens the senses. I had never before paid any attention to the simplicity of my office space, the sheer elegance of this majestic glass prison which... 2. I really ought to focus on the present if I wanted to survive the day. My name just happens to be Daniel Hawthorne. At 34 years of age, I wouldn't stick out in a crowd. Below average height, the combination of my skinny body and my skin color, pasty white bordering on luminescent, would ensure a spot for me at the singles table anywhere in the world. Add this to my cheap suit, worn-down shoes, and do-it-yourself buzz cut which shows off my widow's peak, and I would have to admit that I was not exactly an enticing package deal. That part, however, I believed to be about to change, provided that I could live to see the next day, of course. This was not guaranteed given the situation in which I found myself, hiding just 10 meters from my cubicle behind an ancient telex machine, sweating and shivering with cold at the same time. I stuck my neck out for just a second and pulled it back again. 2 goons were standing right next to my desk while my manager was typing something on my keyboard, looking both nervous and flustered. It would seem that I had made it away from my desk fast enough that they didn't realize that I had vacated the spot a mere 30 seconds ago. How did I know that they were goons, you ask? Excellent question. A number of reasons, really. First, they both looked like street thugs from some crime movie. Something starring Liam Neeson, perhaps. Second, both of them wore bad suits,
and I'd just spotted a gun holster sticking out from one of them. Third, about 24 hours before that moment, I'd stolen €8 million from their boss, Gilyov Aristarch Romanovich. Oh, and this all meant that I had just been made. My thoughts were starting to grow ragged and flustered, as was my breath, and my internal monologue was starting to sound disjointed to my own mind. Okay, time to move. How the hell can I get out of this situation? I need a place to breathe and think, goddammit. Wednesday. Thanks for small mercies. As silently as possible, I crept down the aisle and managed to let myself into the vice president's office. On Wednesdays, she always had an extended lunch appointment with her secretary, Angiolo, and, well, let's just say I've seen him type, and that is not what he was hired for. I moved behind the desk. An old mahogany monster that must have been more than 50 years old, placed my back against the solid wood and tried to stop hyperventilating. Luckily, we were in the middle of the lunch break, or somebody would have spotted me already and asked what the hell I was sneaking about for. This way, I should have at least 15 minutes to formulate a decent plan that might save my sorry ass and put me back on the path to an early retirement on a tropical island somewhere. How the hell had I even gotten myself into this mess? That could easily devolve into something of a long-winded explanation, but when it comes down to it, I suppose it was just boredom. Boredom and a couple of lucky, or unlucky, depending on your point of view, coincidences. The boredom part is easily explained. I worked as a junior specialist in the trade finance department of Interbank, located in the bank's headquarters in central Copenhagen. My day was spent checking documents concerning letters of credit. 9.5 hours daily checking whether the documents contained the required wording and number of commas, counter-checking against the international letter of credit rule set, and occasionally verifying with a colleague whether he would also count something as a discrepancy or not, and my spare time spent playing on my violin, sometimes in crummy bars across town, but more often by my lonesome or my shoddy old PC. I had worked with Interbank for 4 years at that point, and if I were to say so myself, I'd been the epitome of diligent workplace behavior and a damn fine employee. In 4 years, I'd only had one altercation, where I ended up yelling at my boss for a bit. And seriously, if anybody deserved to be insulted on a daily basis, it was her. My behavior notwithstanding, neither yours truly nor anybody else had received a promotion or even a commendation for as far back as I could recall. As if that weren't enough, they had just started docking our pay if we made any errors that could potentially reduce the revenue of the bank. Money-grubbing bastards. Basically, I was bored to tears, and I had already started considering whether unemployment would be an alternative less likely to end in my boredom-induced suicide, when the opportunity of a lifetime dropped into my hands. I've always been a bit of a geek. I've dedicated most of my time to the music, with computers always playing second fiddle. Now, they say music is a demanding mistress, and I wholeheartedly concur. Mistreat her, and you will feel the result right away. Nevertheless, I've played computer games my entire life, even before full-dimensional games, like virtual reality only lifelike enough to be difficult to distinguish from real life, was created. Suffice to say that while I am by no means a computer whiz, during the entirety of my life, computers had always intrigued me, and I'd grown pretty good at handling them. Online, this had given me a number of advantages because I was usually pretty quick at adapting to new programs or situations. In the workplace, it had only landed me with a pile of shitty tasks that I had to do for my boss because she couldn't be asked to figure out how the programs really worked or spend the necessary time to do the legwork herself. Among these tasks figured lovely undertakings, such as generating the weekly and monthly statistics, handling all the maintenance calls, acting as that guy you'd call when the screen did something weird, and manually double-checking the sanctions lists whenever we might have run into an offender. This last part might sound just a tad interesting, what with the investigative part of it and all, but it usually boiled down to checking whether the Muhammad we had received some business from was the Muhammad on the sanctions list or one of the other 10 million Muhammads in the world. This one Friday, however, I was just passing time, the last 20 minutes before my shift was over, and fiddling about with the sanctions program, scrolling through the logs and looking for nothing in particular, when I noticed something strange. The past Tuesday, when the VP had worked late, a very rare occurrence, she had whitelisted something in the program, allowed something to pass through unhindered, which would otherwise have appeared on the radar as a possible infraction. Curious, I decided to take a look at it and was immediately enthralled. It appeared that she had allowed for a letter of credit for 8,215,000 euros from some company called Intertrans Limited in Poland to be allowed through. A company which was on the international sanctions lists for being partially owned by a Mr. Gilyov Aristarch Romanovich, a multinational criminal wanted for extortion, human trafficking, murder, cyberterrorism, and many other intriguing pastimes. In just a short time, everything made sense to me. How the VP had just bragged about buying a new condo, how this was an extremely easy way for Mr. Romanovich to do some money laundering without having to pass the usual checks and balances set up within the system, and, most importantly, how this could possibly be the opportunity of a lifetime for me. I checked the system and expelled my breath in relief. The payment instructions under the letter of credit had not been entered yet. Holy early retirement, Batman. This meant that I had about 48 hours to set up everything I needed to prepare in order for me to scam a multinational crook and set myself up for the largest paycheck of my life. The following 48 hours were probably the busiest in my life. I had so many things to do, so much to investigate, and so many unknowns to consider, any one of which might have quite painful consequences for me if I decided to handle them in the wrong manner. Some of the details were quite technical in detail. How to reroute the money to an account which belonged to me, and how to forward the money through a number of freshly established dummy accounts into a secure account where it would not be discovered, for instance. Other details were more practical in nature. Where should I stay? How does one even disappear and go off the grid? And most importantly, how utterly goddamn stupid was I, getting myself involved with something like scamming a murderous criminal? The practical issues were actually easier to handle than the technical. Everyone tends to assume that being a trade finance specialist means I know something about money and economics, when basically it really means that I'm good at checking documents for flaws. If I had kept myself less busy, I might just have dropped the entire scheme. I'd never involved myself in anything criminal before, but I was just so fed up with my situation that, at the time, my endeavor seemed like a sensible choice. That just shows how much past me knew. In the end, though, I believed that I had everything working as intended. Stealing the money, at least, should work, but as for the rest, only time would tell whether I'd made any mistakes. My decision had been made regardless, and there'd be no turning back. My digital fingerprints would be right there for anybody to see. 2 days later, sweating buckets, breathing heavily, and hiding behind a desk, the answer to my earlier question seemed obvious. I was fatally stupid. Everything was planned out, but I needed to perform the last couple of practicalities from my desk, and then I'd be able to see the money flow into my account moments later. Apparently, I must have done something wrong, set off an alarm of some kind. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 2 goons with biceps the size of my chest waiting at my desk right at that very moment. Carefully, I used the camera in my phone to check whether they were still there. I stuck the lens over the desk a bit, zoomed in, and then checked on the screen. Damn it. They were still there, and from the looks of it, growing increasingly agitated. They might even have figured out by now that the money had already been rerouted. What the hell should I do? I had to distract them somehow. I took in my surroundings, checking what I had to work with. The VP's office was a large, gaudy office, built over the old conceptions of what an important person's office should look like. The walls were covered with dark wood panels, and the large room was mostly empty, dominated by a large mahogany desk at the back of the room. There wasn't even another chair in front of the desk. Every conversation with the VP had the feeling of a goddamn royal audience where you were lucky if you made it out without... My apologies. I digress yet again. The space behind the desk was dominated by a huge bookcase, packed with books on trade finance, entirely unread, of course, and the desk was filled with family photos, awards, her phone, and her computer. This left me, basically, up the proverbial creek without a paddle. The only thing I could even access was the phone, and who should I call? The police? Excuse me, I've tried to steal a couple of million euros from a murderous villain, and now he's out for payback? Could you please send some backup? I was entirely without any... Wait a minute. I frantically pulled the phone down behind the desk with me and called the one number that all employees know by heart. The in-house IT hotline. Blessedly, the call was answered within a couple of seconds. Hi, Jasper speaking. How can I help you? The voice was just about as bored as I'd probably be, assisting people with monotonous and undemanding IT tasks every day. I tried to make my voice sound agitated, which really wasn't that hard at the time, and responded, Hey, Jasper, looks like the smoke detectors in the printer room up here are on the fritz. There's a lot of smoke coming out under the door, and I really don't want to open the door. What should I do? Apparently, I must have sounded sufficiently distressed, because after a couple of seconds, he said, Okay, just stay calm, sir. Let me just start the fire alarm, and then you should move in a calm fashion towards the exit with all the other employees. All right, I will. Thank you, Jasper. Good to his word, a loud and insistent blaring started just a couple of seconds later, and a short while later, people started shuffling towards the exit, some annoyed with the interruption, but most apparently pretty pleased with the unasked-for break. I kept an eye on the initial rush through my phone, and once everybody, including the goons, yes, I checked, had left for the stairs, I started following. Right at that moment, it would appear that Lady Luck was on my side. Interbank hosted over 4,000 employees on 18 floors. We were on the 4th floor, which, to my advantage, meant that the stairs would be packed with people for the next couple of minutes. Theoretically, I should be able to just follow the crowd, keep my head down, and take it to the street as soon as I made it outside the building. Unless my two bemuscled friends were just a tad cleverer than your average chimpanzee, that is. I smacked my forehead in irritation. Of course they would be keeping an eye on the exits. I ran into the office for what would probably be the last time. With a silent apology to my colleague Sergey for all the times I had made fun of him for wearing his old tweed suit and sixpence with suspenders, I snatched up the hat from the wardrobe and the suit from his chair and put them on en route to the stairs. Sergey always claimed that the combination made him look sophisticated, when the truth was that it just made him look ancient. Right that moment, I didn't care about looks. If his clothes got me safely out of there, I might even finally forgive Sergey for breaking up our two-man band before it really got started. We could have made it big, damn it, even if we fought about most everything. In the stairway, the atmosphere was pretty buoyant. I slowly maneuvered my way into the middle of a group from communications, laughing loudly and discussing whether they should head over to the Godhead, an English pub on the corner, in order to pass the time. Acting as if I were a part of their group, we managed to make it to the ground floor without incident. I studiously avoided looking around and just followed the group, laughing when they did and acting as if I were a part of their crowd. Inwardly, I had already congratulated myself on my daring escape. We crossed the hallway and made it out into the harsh and bright April sunlight on what promised to be a cold but pretty day. I was almost home safe. Now, I've seen a great many movies and read my share of books. I know what you're supposed to do and not to do in these situations, how you blow your cover, and where you're supposed to just act cool. However, there are certain situations where you just act on instinct. When someone hits you, you flinch. When someone makes fun of you in public, you blush. And when someone calls your name from behind, you turn around. And so I did. Once I had turned around halfway, I realized my error and started running for my life. I don't know whether you've ever gone for a jog through downtown Copenhagen, but I can tell you right now, it's not the easiest place to navigate at a sprint. The inner city is absolutely crowded with people everywhere. After the latest increase in automated car traffic within the inner city, the traffic situation has become quite a bit better, but the streets are nonetheless filled with cars from sunrise to sundown. I do still love the city, though. With its mixture of old-fashioned low-rise brick buildings dating back to the 18th century and the newer steel and glass high-tech skyscrapers, it forms a, to my eye, beautiful hybrid between the old and the new. I absolutely love the atmosphere, except when scrambling in between baby strollers and businesswomen, running for dear life. I have never been a runner. That's not a secret at all. I might have had the shape for it, but I have never had any stamina whatsoever. Luckily, when I chanced a quick glance behind me, the two bodybuilders running after me didn't exactly look like they were frequent joggers either. Bench-pressing small cars, perhaps, but not jogging. Their faces were beet red, hopefully from the exertion. The only problem was that I couldn't accelerate to a decent speed while I was dodging and weaving through the crowd. Apparently, the two steroid freaks didn't have the same problem. Anybody who made it into their path either flinched away or was bodily thrown away. If only I could make it to a bit clearer pathway, I could probably run faster than them until I'd be able to jump into a bus or taxi or something. Luckily, I thought between gasping breaths, they won't dare to shoot for fear of hitting somebody in the crowd. I could probably... At this point, a teenage girl slightly to my side went down with a cry and a spray of blood. Damn it! What the hell do I do? I thought. And besides a soft whimper, I don't recall having any other coherent thoughts for a while. I'm not entirely sure whether it was sensory overload, too much fear and action for someone who was unused to this kind of stress, or simply my basic instinct taking over to avoid my body curling up into a fetal position and ensuring my imminent death or abduction to an even worse fate. What I do know is that to this day, I only have a few clear memories from my panicked flight. Blink. I'm running between two cars on a 6-lane road, and a side window on the car to my left explodes, showering my leg with shards. Blink. A departing train is carrying away one of the goons right in front of me. I must have jumped on the train and then exited it again, just when it was leaving the station. Blink. I'm getting up from the sidewalk, looking for a second into the pain-filled eyes of the elderly lady who apparently just hit me with her bike. I came to a while later, curled up in the corner of a men's room inside what turned out to be the central train station. My body was shaking, and I was entirely soaked, dirty, and reeked of sweat. To my disgust, my bladder had given out at some point during my escape, and I looked decidedly ill. Luckily, this area of Central Station is usually inhabited by drunks, homeless people, and drug addicts, and at this point, I very much looked the part. At this point, my original plan was shot to pieces, and I had to rely on my instincts, intelligence, and probably more useful in this situation, the accumulated experience from countless spy movies and books. To my surprise, my preposterous scheme actually worked. It also helped that I had at least had the foresight to withdraw the remainder of my now non-existent money reserves in cash beforehand. I started by changing clothes with one of the homeless people at a crazy overpriced rate. The clothes probably smelled the same, and mine might even have been cleaner than his, but that was of no importance to me at this point. This fact, however, was, among his few belongings were an oversized hoodie that could hide my face completely. I then walked into the nearest mall, bought a fresh change of clothes and some food, and checked out a shopping cart to complete the hobo image. I probably overdid it quite a bit during the process, but it turns out that no one is that interested in approaching a smelly, muttering individual who looks like he's on his last leg. Anybody familiar with Copenhagen will know that certain areas of the city host some motels that, at a pretty exorbitant fee, will let you borrow a bed, a bathroom, and some company for an hour or two. If the guy handling the payments wondered about me paying the full amount for a bed for the night without any company, he didn't bother to ask, and didn't even comment on my appearance. Easy pickings for him, and what would probably amount to a safe haven for me for the night. For an extra bit of cash, he even agreed to order a cab for me at 9 a.m. the following day. The bed was pretty battered, probably filled with indescribable amounts of bacteria, bed bugs, and other curiosities. But after a long shower, a meal, and a clean pair of boxers, I didn't care in the least. To me, it felt like the most comfortable feather bed ever, and I slept through the night like a baby. The next morning, even battered and bruised as I was, I felt like a new person, filled to the brim with hope and positive emotions as I stepped out the door of the cab and into the office space of Exogenics Incorporated, my gold-rimmed, soon-to-be pleasure-filled hideout where I would be able to lay low for the next couple of years, or, well, just until the worst heat around my person had dissipated, and I would be able to start using my hard-earned cash without fearing a manhunt. Chapter 2. Going Under. As I was approaching one of the only 5 Exogenics offices in Denmark, I expected to be impressed, and they did not let me down. The huge office spaces placed in one of the finer commercial areas was a marvel of light, glass, and stylized curves. The huge glass front sported their well-known bold golden logo and their equally well-known motto, "We don't create games, we create life." Inside, they'd struck a tentative balance between glass, tiny high-tech details here and there, and a few plants. Otherwise, there was a distinct lack of features. The huge, airy space sported only a row of seats along one wall, one large informational touchscreen, and a huge screen on the wall, switching between large quotes, supposedly from satisfied customers. The only part that seemed slightly out of style was the 20-something young man with short, spiky black hair behind the counter, who managed to make even the classy suit he'd been stuffed into seem slightly sleazy. I perused the quotes as I approached him. "My dad used to tell me stories about princes saving the princess. Now I'm making my own stories. Agartor, level 45 paladin. In my daily life, I'm an accountant, but in World of Chains, I truly live. Shazarin, level 21 sorcerer. You know when they say the grass is always greener on the other side? It is. It truly is. Sherman, level 32 rogue." I chuckled a bit at the last one as I approached the counter. Spike's name was apparently Jens, as it said on his name tag. He nodded at me as he fiddled around with something on his keyboard and said, "Hey man, be right there with you. Just gotta finish checking this out." He punched a couple of keys, swerved towards me on his chair, and gave me a wide grin. "Can you believe it? Somebody in-game just spent 2 weeks making a throne, a friggin' throne. Crazy nutter. Sorry about that. If they ask me to sub on a Sunday, my productivity isn't going to be through the roof. Now, what can I do for you? Need a booth for a week? Or maybe you need a real break from society?" I returned his smile and nodded. "Yeah, you could say that. I really do need a break. I've actually paid in advance for a prolonged vacation. It should be booked under the name Daniel Hawthorne." He checked on his screen and clicked a couple of times until his face lit up. "Yeah, man, right here. You should have been here yesterday already, no? No worries. Sometimes I mix up the days as well. Says here you've paid for the deluxe tour for 2 full years? I'm so envious. That is going to be the best vacation ever. Do you have a character ready, or are you planning for a fresh start? Have a class in mind already? Anyway, I need some ID, and you need to sign these forms. Standard safety stuff, you know. First time on the inside?" I slipped him my ID card, then checked out the forms and started filling them in. Basic stuff, really. No, I wouldn't hold Exogenics liable for any health or mental problems sustained while inside the simulation, except under specific situations as specified in paragraphs 3A through F. Yes, I had tried both Full D and World of Chains before. No, I did not have a history of chronic illnesses. I glanced at Jens, having gotten somewhat lost in his deluge of good-natured questions bursting from him. Well, I had a rogue during the beta, but I really feel like starting over. I'm planning something special for this vacation. A little introduction to what I was getting myself involved in probably wasn't a bad decision. In short, Exogenics Incorporated was a company that had appeared out of the blue about 2.5 years earlier and had been making money hand over fist ever since. They had just one product, World of Chains. But as it turns out, that was everything they needed in order to cater to their select cadre of customers. What is World of Chains, you ask? Long story short, it was a computer game. But it was to competing computer games what microwave ramen is to a 3 Michelin-star gourmet meal. Theoretically, they're both food, but you really shouldn't compare the two. Exogenics called it the only true 5D experience available on Earth, which was a marketing employee's way of trying to say that everything you experience in the game will feel almost entirely real. Flowers will smell real. Your sword will feel real to you and way too real to your enemy. The visuals look 100% realistic, and you can even feel pleasure and pain inside the game, even though the pain is turned way down. The setting was medieval, and the game was filled with magic, monsters, and you had the chance to be either hero or villain inside this world. Oh, so that means the entire planet is playing World of Chains these days? Oh, hell no. Where games had become ever increasingly convenient, easy to master, and approachable over the past decades, Exogenics had chosen another path. The game was expensive as hell, the learning curve steep, and the information available to aid your way in-game negligible. Where the leading games sported more than 120 million active players, World of Chains had only 200,000. But those players paid through the nose for the privilege of playing the most realistic game ever. Personally, I'd won a 3-week spot in the beta, which is how I'd learned about it 2 years back. If you wonder about my sharing my real ID card with the company, they don't divulge any information to anybody. The company is notoriously private with information and only shares what's legally demanded. The payment, however, I'd handled by cash in another office the day before. I didn't want to leave any money trail from my old accounts to my World of Chains account, no matter how unlikely it was that they'd be able to follow it. I chatted for a bit with Jens. He was actually a pretty funny guy and extremely savvy on World of Chains. You probably couldn't entirely avoid it when you worked there. After a bit, he looked at me and said, "Well, if you've played before, you know the drill. Creating a new character is done right here, where a technical officer, c'est moi, can guide you through any general doubts before you get installed and go under. Do you want me to hold your hand during the process, or just have a short chat when you're done?" I frowned. "Let's just discuss it afterwards." But I never actually understood the need for this part. Couldn't they just as easily have handled this through the character creation process in-game? Not to dismiss your help or anything, but top-of-the-line AI, artificial intelligence and all, right? He sighed. "You and me both, mate. The official version you've probably heard. I know it by heart. The procedures necessary to obtain the hyper-realism of World of Chains is such that a player who leaves the capsule cannot enter the game for a 10-day period at least. Therefore, we, as a team, do everything in our power to make sure that the customer has been properly vetted before entering the game. What I believe, though, it's just to make it seem more exclusive if you have a fancy guide help you vet your decisions while you make them. Works, though, doesn't it?" He winked. I laughed and assured him I was entirely overwhelmed with his services, and he led me to a room nearby where I could make my character choices in private. Everything had been taken care of. Refreshments galore, a stylish couch, and a huge screen were there, already logged into my account, and I made myself comfortable, and ready to immerse myself in the choices. Chapter 3. Decisions. You need to know a bit about World of Chains if you want to follow what the hell I'm talking about half of the time. Apart from being the most realistic game there is, it is also probably the least approachable and the very toughest. This is also why people take it extremely seriously. In earlier MMOs and VR MMOs, a person who devoted enough time to the game and watched a couple of invincible cookie-cutter warrior build tutorials would inevitably get a good build, gain good gear, and be able to compete with the very best. Not so in World of Chains. Why? 3 words. Procedurally generated content. Up until World of Chains, those words usually meant that the maps and items that dropped for you would be randomly chosen, within certain limitations and frameworks, yet the game and development of the storyline in the game would typically remain the same, and a person who made the same choices in 2 consecutive games would usually play 2 similar games. In World of Chains, however, it meant procedurally generated everything. The quests you'd receive were living, breathing things, and generated depending on your personality and playstyle as well as exogenics algorithms. Additionally, they were ever-changing. It made sense, though. Why would a person offer the same quest to everybody day in, day out? Wouldn't he run out of money at some point? Or crave some red meat in place of fish for once? The practical implications, however, were a bit different and way more extensive. The only unofficial wiki I'd seen for the game had been dropped after a while. The main contributor had rage quit, as the info on quests, factions, and such was constantly evolving, growing outdated. Sure, some hard info was to be had out there, skills, some achievements, tutorials, but all in all, the fanbase was too small to support much in the way of solid intel. No clue how the AI handled all the players messing around, but it worked. Also, your basic RPG worked something like this. You put 1 point in ranged weapons, and you'd automatically know how to use bows, arbalests, crossbows, and basically any ranged weapon there was. Not so in World of Chains. Reach a skill of 50 in ranged weapons, and if you hit your target, you'll do a lot of increased damage and have an increased chance of a critical hit, increased damage and ignore target's armor. But if you've never picked up a bow before, it won't help your precision, and it sure as hell won't make it easier for you to reload a crossbow for the first time in a combat situation. I know this from personal experience. World of Chains is a tough game to master, but the rewards are impressive. I did have quite an advantage this time around. I didn't have any plans to enter the game to try to become an all-powerful white knight. Lots and lots of players were already tons of levels above me, and had feats and powers I'd never even heard of. I simply entered the game to while away the time in luxury, blow off steam, and spend a lot of money to have fun with gambling, singing, playing music for the hopefully adoring crowd, doing tons of mind-altering substances, and entertaining female company, until people back in real life had stopped searching for me and the money. All right. It was time to take a look at the possibilities. The screen started out entirely black, and apart from the World of Chains logo, there were just the 3 possibilities. New character, load character, Amarog, level 12, human rogue, exit World of Chains. I have to admit, I had a lot of fun with my rogue back in the day when I played in the beta. I had even become halfway decent with a short sword dagger combo and my trusty shortbow. But there was no way in hell that I was going to continue playing with him. Let's just say that he wasn't the right character for having fun. Tall, brooding, dark-haired, and scarred, and a charisma score of a whopping 10. The girls would be running away from him. Not a possibility. I was there to have fun. This leads me back to World of Chains being tough and not very approachable. When I clicked on New Character, a prompt appeared. Warning. By creating a new character, you will permanently delete your old character, Amarog, level 12 human rogue. Do you wish to continue? Yes or no? With a small sigh, I bid Amarog adieu and clicked yes. Now the fun was about to start. World of Chains has a wide range of races to choose from, with a number of stat differences and other characteristics and skills which made for huge differences in the game. A lot of players don't think this through and just choose whichever race looks strongest, toughest, or most beautiful, and then bitch about it afterwards when their character build doesn't really work out. Man, I was really looking forward to getting started. I'd just have to make sure that they hadn't changed anything about the different stats and their importance. It'd suck to have the perfect plan for lounging away the life in luxury and hangers-on, and then have it ruined because they had changed something seemingly unimportant about the way stats worked. Strength allows you to hold more items and increases your melee damage as well as damage with certain ranged weapons. Also increases climbing and swimming speed. I couldn't care less about strength. I just needed enough to lift a wine glass. Perception. The better your perception, the quicker and more effectively you'll spot enemies, traps, hidden items, and things which might otherwise escape your attention. Perception includes all of your senses, not just eyesight. Sure, a bit of increased perception would be nice, if only to spot the cheaters around the card table. Endurance. Increases max health and your resistance to poison. Also determines your general stamina and your ability to hold your breath. Why would I even bother? I'd probably even choose a room at the most expensive tavern in order to avoid any excessive walking. Charisma. Increases the reaction you get when you interact with people and animals. It also influences trading skills and other social skills. That was the one for me. The key to enjoying life and ensuring the best reactions from people? Yes, please. Intelligence. Increases max mana and your resistance to mental magic and is a key factor in many skills. I felt plenty intelligent already. Also, mana? Whatever for. Agility. Increases your speed and chance to critically hit with ranged weapons and small arms. This used to be critical for my rogue, but this time around, I had no intentions of landing in any situations where I would need to run away or shoot people. Luck. Influences your chance to critically hit and a lot of other skills and situations. I definitely intended to get lucky. Sorry, the horrible pun was intended. I'd definitely throw a couple of points into luck. No, nothing had been altered. It was time to go looking for that perfect race for me.
Human. Humans are the most prolific species of World of Chains currently. They have spread out all over the central continent of Ion and seemingly prosper wherever they set roots. In general, humans get along with most races and adapt quickly to even the most challenging of climates. Stats: Strength, 8. Perception, 8. Endurance, 8. Charisma, 8. Intelligence, 8. Agility, 8. Luck, 8. Traits: Jack of all trades. Humans are proficient with any manner of skills. Skill increases are 2% more likely to happen. Well-liked. Humans are universally well-liked. Plus 10% to any reputation gain.
The well-liked trait was actually the reason I chose human the first time. And, well, that, plus it was more familiar. Generally, gaining reputation, or building grinding rep, with different factions in the game is of huge importance. The better reputation you have with a certain group, the better quests and juicier rewards you get, among other things. This time around, though, I didn't plan on spending any time grinding rep, and the stats suck. I'd put human in the no pile for now and check the next one. Elves do focus on charisma, but also on intelligence, which would be a complete waste for me. Also, people tend to see them as standoffish and unapproachable. Not for me. Let's move a little faster. Catfolk focus on perception and outdoor skills, another one for the reject pile. Dwarves as well, endurance and crafting, along with gnomes, intelligence and enchanting, and ratlings, agility and darksight. How about half-orc? No. That just left me with 2 races, halflings and half-elves.
Half-elf. The spread of humans all over Ion including to the traditional Western Elven settlements, have resulted in an ever-increasing number of half-elven offspring. Generally speaking, these offspring are perceived as favored in their facial features, receiving both some of the arcane beauty of their elven parent and the passion of the human race. They do, however, also inherit some of the fragility of their elven parentage. Otherwise, their physique is quite similar to the human one. Strength, 8. Perception, 10. Endurance, 6. Charisma, 10. Intelligence, 8. Agility, 8. Luck, 8. Traits. Fair visage. Being blessed with the best from both parents, half-elves gain +1 charisma for each level gained. Low light vision. A half-elf can see twice as far as a human in poor illumination. He retains the ability to distinguish color and detail under these conditions. Pariah to elves. In general, elves disregard half-elves as both a disgrace and an example of the parent elf's dishonor. Half-elves start with a disliked reputation to all elven factions, and earn a -10% reputation gain with elves. Halfling. These stout wanderers can be found in every settlement in World of Chains. However, rarely in large numbers outside their own homelands. Halflings are generally known for their jovial temperament, incredible curiosity, and insatiable wanderlust. At a height of 1.30 meters to 1.60 meters, few halflings are ever called strong of arm, but they are surprisingly tough for their size. Strength, 6. Perception, 8. Endurance, 8. Charisma, 10. Intelligence, 8. Agility, 10. Luck, 8. Traits. Jolly personality. Generally, halflings are considered to be great company. Kind-hearted, curious, and open-minded. Their charisma is boundless. +1 charisma for each level gained. Natural balance. Even when entirely inebriated, halflings possess an amazing equilibrium. +5 to skill checks concerning climbing, acrobatics, and balancing acts.
Finally, we'd gotten to the interesting races. Both the halfling and the half-elf race, can you even call it a race if it's a hybrid? Anyway, both races had excellent charisma scores, and if I did decide to level up a bit, my charisma had the potential to skyrocket. The half-elf was a half step ahead, chuckle, because I was aiming at perception over agility. The traits I'd call a tie. The halfling had no negative traits, but his second trait was a pretty weak one. Low light vision, however, was pretty useful, but it'd definitely suck to be disliked by all those pretty elven girls out there. So basically, not much of a difference. In the end, I let my personal preferences decide. Add another half-elf to the universe. Not due to my childhood infatuation with the ancient Dragonlance books, but because of one thing. In an extremely realistic setting, with other characters reaching over 2 meters of height, it'd suck being the perpetual shorty in the group. I took a final look at the half-elf race and accepted the race. The screen went blank for a second and faded in again with a new title. Choose your class. This choice, at least, would be pretty damn quick for me. Sure, there used to be 8 classes to choose from. 12 now. They'd added a couple of extra classes in the meantime. But in order to maintain the result I was going for, there was only one realistic choice. I scrolled through the possibilities in order to make sure that they hadn't added another class choice that'd be viable for me. Fighters, warrior, knight, or fist fighter? No, thank you. They were all dependent on high strength endurance and maybe agility as well. For the half-elf, I might as well have written, I'm a bloody noob who doesn't understand how stats work on my forehead. Healers, cleric, druid, or shaman. That was new. Hell, shaman might actually have been a real possibility, given that they relied on charisma instead of intelligence and light armor with a low strength requirement. But, apart from experimentation with different interesting mushrooms and spirit animals, would a shaman know how to party? No. I had to move on. Mages, summoner, sorcerer, or demonologist. No, no, and no. All were very intelligence-based and were going in a completely different way from what I wanted. And finally, the scouts. Rogue, hunter, and bard. I was relieved to see that nothing had changed. Rogues and hunters were still heavily agility-driven, but the bard was something else entirely. I know. In all RPGs, bards are the laughingstock of the entire group, entirely useless and are only good for something when you are inside a tavern and need to gamble or seduce someone, or for that rare social interaction. Oh, wait. What did I say earlier? That my plan was to lay low for 2 years doing nothing but staying inside taverns and enjoy myself? Thus, my cunning plan was revealed, and seriously, looking at the class description, my decision was validated once again.
Bard. Bards are artists, and they practice magic in the same manner that they practice diplomacy or songs, flawlessly and artfully. They have an inherent sense of the way people perceive reality and master personality, illusion, and charm magic. Above all else, however, bards know how to work a crowd. Subtly altering and managing the mood of a large crowd is second nature to any bard worth his salt. In combat, some bards prefer to work their magic from a safe distance, while others dive into the thick of it, and others still work their personality magic in the midst of the melee. Out of combat, the bard's paths are as many-fold and varied as stars in the sky, ranging from gamblers, drunkards, and outlaws to court advisors, courtesans, and your common, everyday tavern bard. Class trait: universally welcome. A bard is always welcomed, almost regardless of where he goes. Everybody knows that a bard entering the room will soon result in cheerful music, good conversation, laughter, and enjoyment. The bard's initial reputation with any faction that would otherwise start at disliked or neutral is automatically increased to the next level. Reputations below disliked and above neutral are not affected.
Yes! I pumped my fist into the air. Not only was the class description exactly what I was aiming for, a gambler and a drunkard who's an expert at working a crowd? Yeah, that'd be me, few hours from now. The class trait was everything that I'd dimly recalled. From now on, I'd be warmly welcomed even in the dodgier joints of the capital, and I wouldn't even have to lift a finger for it. I clicked the large button. Accept class. Bard. Now there was only one last decision to make before I received my freebie stat points and would be able to dive into the world. My star sign. World of Chains allowed you to choose your character's star sign, which could give you some small advantage and another way to tailor your character exactly to your liking. I scrolled through the 12 possibilities and weeded out any and all of those star signs that gave a bonus to combat skills, stats I didn't care about, and crafting skills. That only left me with 4 possible star signs to choose from.
The Wolf. Gain a permanent +5 to Perception. The Changeling. Passive skill. +5 to all resistances. The River. Gain the skill High Tide. Once a day, your highest stat is increased by +50% for 30 seconds. The Temple. Gain a permanent +5 to luck.
I was just about to choose the Temple. Those +5 luck would be a great help at the dice table, and then I froze. I'd talked to a dwarf player who loved having the High Tide skill. Once a day, it was a 30-second Hail Mary save-my-ass skill for him, which temporarily gave him enough hit points to try to survive a bad situation. But I had never contemplated using the skill with charisma. Once a day, I could be almost supernaturally persuasive and charming. Timed right, this could mean... Wow. I was almost drooling, realizing the many ways I'd be able to abuse this skill. Choose birth sign, the River. Grinning, I clicked the big button, and the screen went black again, followed by another box. Choose your name. This one I was prepared for. With a bard, there could only be one possible choice, the name of the first person who had taught me to truly enjoy music. A long-dead Italian violin virtuoso. I entered the name Arcangelo and was rewarded with a screen showing my stats and another splash of text. You have 25 unused stat points. Kindly allocate them now.
Current stats: Strength, 8. Perception, 10. Endurance, 6. Charisma, 10. Intelligence, 8. Agility, 8. Luck, 8.
Normally, I spend way too much time fretting over where best to allocate my points, but this time around, I had a scheme ready. To divide my stat points between the stats I was planning to use and act as if none of the other stats even existed. Why waste points on something like agility when it wasn't going to be used at all? No, I'd place 60% of my stat points on my main stat, charisma, and share the rest equally between perception and luck. Having done this, I took a look at my final character. Character info. Name Arcangelo. Race half-elf. Class Bard. Level 1. Experience towards next level 0 out of 1,000. Crafting class none. Gathering class none. Stats and attributes. Health 60 out of 60. Mana 80 out of 80. Stamina 60 out of 60. Strength 8. Perception 15. Endurance 6. Charisma 25. Intelligence 8. Agility 8. Luck 13. Skills. Skill name High Tide. Level Max. Rank blank. Stat Charisma. Traits and achievements. Fair visage. Being blessed with the best from both parents, half-elves gain +1 charisma for each level gained. Low light vision. A half-elf can see twice as far as a human in poor illumination. He retains the ability to distinguish color and detail under these conditions. Pariah to elves. In general, elves disregard half-elves as both a disgrace and an example as to the dishonor of the parent elf. Half-elves start with a disliked reputation to all elven factions and earn a -10% reputation gain with elves. Universally welcome. A bard is always welcomed, almost regardless of where he goes. Everyone knows that a bard entering the room will soon result in cheerful music, good conversation, laughter, and enjoyment. The bard's initial reputation with any faction that would otherwise start at disliked or neutral is automatically increased to the next level. Reputations below disliked and above neutral are not affected. I definitely liked what I saw. My charisma was going through the roof, and I hadn't even started yet. The screen also showed a full body portrait of what I would look like in-game. Not much of a change concerning my body. I was still skinny, verging on scrawny, but my looks had definitely taken a turn for the better. Knowing my own reflection, I could still recognize my face in there somewhere, but my jaw was more defined, my skin a healthy-looking brown, and, thank you Exogenics, my dark hair was glossy, full, and reached down to my neck in long, flowing locks. I clicked on the huge glowing button to accept the character. Moments later, Jens entered the room with a tablet in his hand, scratching his head. Are you sure about this, Daniel? Your bard spells will be very efficient, but survivability will probably be a problem. I waved off his concerns and briefly told him how I was just there to enjoy myself, enjoy the realism, and play a lot of music in seedy taverns all over the realm. And moments later, he'd escorted me to my home for the next 2 years. I'll skip past telling you about all of the splendors and technical features of the Exogenics VS5000 copyright, the shiny, fancy, state-of-the-art capsule where my inert body would spend 24 months getting gently rocked and massaged to avoid muscle atrophy while my mind was having a ball. First, because I forgot almost all the technical details Jens was spewing at me almost the second he told them to me. I never was that much of a tech geek. And second, because entering the capsule is sort of embarrassing and, intrusive. There's tubing. Suffice to say, after a while I took a deep, relieved breath as the inside of the capsule disappeared and the familiar logo of World of Chains rose before my eyes. I'd made it, and the sweet life was about to start. After a moment, a single light mote started swirling around before my eyes on the black background, and I recognized the intro song to World of Chains starting to play in the background. A disembodied female voice started emanating from nowhere while more motes slowly joined the first, increasing the light around me.
In the beginning was Nerus, a world of plenty, of magic and technology, monsters and gods, home to an abundance of races and possibilities.
The motes had increased to a steady light all around me, and I could see that I was in a cave, slowly drifting towards the exit.
When the parting happened, it seemed the end of days for Nerus. The world was splitting apart at the seams, ecosystems falling apart, continents tearing away and disappearing.
Floating from the cave, I found myself suspended in the air on an island covered by forest. Increasing in speed, I flew toward the edge of the forest and looked down at nothing. No ocean, no valley, just skies below. Flying along the edge of the forest island, I could clearly see that it was floating freely in the middle of the sky, with nothing perceptible holding it up.
Were it not for the mages of Ion, the Armageddon might well have taken place that day. Somehow they managed to stop the process and keep the continent together. They could not, however, reverse the process, and still today, our night sky is a shattered one.
Flying below the island, I spotted something. A monumental chain, wide as a bridge, connected to the island and leading straight down into the skies. Increasing in speed, I rushed downwards, following the chain for a long time. The distance was staggering to take in. I finally spotted the ground, and with that, the city. A huge metropolis, sprawling over the land, centered on an enormous triangular, gravity-defying keep. This was not what caught my eye, however. The islands did. Providing a constant rustling and groaning, thousands of chains of varying sizes spread throughout the city to maintain hundreds of islands that were fixed above the city, ranging from an island containing solely a single cottage to a piece of land which covered a large part of the city in perpetual shadow.
We are taking everything back, however, slowly recovering that which we lost, reattaching lost pieces of history and land to ourselves. Welcome, adventurer, to our struggle. Welcome to the world of chains.
Chapter 4. Got Wood. I woke up in a meadow, of all places. Seriously, a bloody meadow, with chirping birds, streaks of sun peeking through the foliage, and yes, of course, a clear blue sky overhead, completing the perfect picture of serenity, nature in balance with itself, and not a single bloody tavern in sight. I've been told that there are close to 1,000 different starting areas, and it would seem that I'd lost the lottery on this draw and started in one of the more remote areas. I mentally willed the in-game map to open and checked out my position. Yeah. Basically, I was close to the western shores of Ion with the Dwarven territories far to the north, and Vesterfjord, the area of the barbarian race, somewhere quite away to the southwest. Ah well. This only meant that I'd have to locate what passes for a city around here, find a bank, cash out, and shell out for a portal to the capital where the fun could start. The show is not cancelled, my friends, only postponed. All right, I'd better take stock of what I have to work with. I opened the inventory. Accessing any menu in World of Chains was ridiculously easy. Basically, you'd just send a mental instruction for whatever you wanted, and it would appear in front of your eyes, semi-transparent and easy to inspect, and looked at what I'd been granted as starting equipment. Peasant's leggings, the most basic form of pants. These leggings have been constructed from the cheapest wool available, and badly constructed at that. They will serve to provide a little heat and decency, and not much else. Includes a length of rope for a belt. Workmanship, bad. Durability, 10 out of 10. Peasant's shirt, the cheapest type of shirt. This shirt has been inexpertly woven from the cheapest wool available. It will keep a light breeze away and save you the worst of stares. Workmanship, bad. Durability, 10 out of 10. Leather shoes. A pair of crude leather shoes with wooden soles and a simple strap and buckle. They will not keep out any fluids, nor will they keep your feet warm, but they will provide your feet with the most basic of protection. Workmanship, bad. Durability, 10 out of 10. Wow, they really didn't mess around with us beginners now, did they? I looked down on my arms and legs, and of course the clothes were, inevitably, brown, crude, and horribly ugly. Oh! I started twitching. And itchy to boot. Did they really give me clothes with lice in them? I gave the sky a finger. Just this one time, please turn down the realism a bit, Exogenics. Well, maybe the weapons they'd given me weren't entirely horrible. I had a look. Copper dagger. This crudely made copper dagger offers you the most basic offensive possibilities. The hilt is wrapped with hemp to improve the grip, and the pommel made of fur. Damage, 1 to 6. Workmanship, bad. Durability, 15 out of 15. Ash shortbow. There are tons of versions and permutations of the classic shortbow. This one approaches the most basic version, with an untreated bow staff and a sinew string attached to the staff via a groove cut into the top and bottom and then tied around the ends. The draw strength is dismissible, as is the quality. Damage modifier, -1. Workmanship, bad. Durability, 10 out of 10. Ash arrow. This ash arrow is tipped with a bronze arrowhead and fletched with an unknown animal's feathers glued to the shaft. The arrow is poorly made and not entirely straight. Damage, 1 to 6. Workmanship, bad. Modifier, 10% chance of missing entirely. So much for that positive outlook. Now, the good news was that they'd actually given me a whopping 50 arrows for the bow. The bad news was that the arrows were about as crappy as the weapons themselves. I sighed and decided to get the rest over with before I moved on. I'd received 10 copper pieces, enough for a warm meal, some bread and water, each holding 5 portions. The bread, at least, was marginally useful, restoring 100 health over 30 seconds. The water had the same effect on mana, only I didn't have any spells to begin with. Oh, and I'd also received 3 minor health potions that'd instantly restore 50 health upon consumption. Apparently there was a limit to how stingy the creators were. I equipped the short bow and a couple of arrows and tried to gain my bearings. The map wasn't of any help in that regard. If you hadn't paid for any of the additional in-game maps and hadn't explored anything at all, it only showed major cities and areas, and I was clearly quite far from one of those. Once you started exploring stuff, the map was actually quite nifty, but then that wasn't going to be necessary for me. I started exploring the old-fashioned way, looking for high ground and then seeing what I could find. With my old rogue, I'd just have climbed one of the highest trees and used that as a lookout post. But with my agility, that was not an option. I'd probably cave in my skull in the process. Luckily, the forest wasn't too dense, and maybe half a kilometer away I could make out a low hill which was conveniently clear of trees. I made my way carefully through the forest, keeping an eye out for any movement. With my stats, most hostile animals, monsters, or players, which in World of Chains meant quite a large percentage, would be able to make light work of me. Luckily, I made it to the hill without incident. I couldn't help but notice that my horribly low endurance was actually something of an annoyance. I got winded quite easily. Breathing hard, I climbed the hill and took a look at my surroundings. Turning full circle left me entirely breathless. Both from the climb, I'd probably end up paying somebody to help level me up a bit so I could raise my endurance, just a bit, and from the amazing view that surrounded me. I decided to take a short break on a smattering of stones divided in a circle on the hill, some old ruins or something. Stamina was, unfortunately for me, relatively realistic in World of Chains. Steep climbs, jogging, fighting, taking a hit, and skills used in physical combat, these all took stamina, which was determined by your endurance, one of my absolute dump stats. I just hoped this would be the extent of my challenges on that count. The weather was clear, and the sun shone softly down upon me with only a few thin clouds lazily drifting over the sky. Apparently, the surrounding land went gently downhill from where I was standing, and it seemed like I could see forever. I was surrounded on all sides by forest. A green, thriving forest with barely a hint of domestication. This was probably what it looked like for the first European explorers to make it to some of the non-inhabited parts of the Americas. A sparkling azure river just to the south of my position dominated the view, crossing the landscape from the southwest to the east, a number of smaller offshoots joining from every direction. Luckily for me, the key words here were a hint of domestication. From here, I could see a small village located on the north edge of the river, placed along a tiny road which also appeared to go on to the edge of forever from north to south. Surrounded by a wooden palisade and a smattering of houses, this was probably what passed for the low-level starting area around here, where you could level up a bit and gain a few low-level skills before you moved on to the really interesting stuff. Well, that was definitely my ticket out of this backwater. Best get hopping. 15 minutes later, I breathed out a sigh of relief when I spotted the palisade walls surrounding the village. I'd made it. Just a couple of minutes from now, and I'd be in the capital, looking for a promising watering hole. Of course, this was the moment I was attacked. My only warning was a slight rustling in the foliage above me, and the next thing I knew, a number of things happened in quick succession. First, a large weight hit my shoulders. Next, a pop-up obscured part of my vision. You have been hit. You receive 42 damage. Type, non-lethal. I didn't have any time to register this, however, as the next experience was my body hitting the ground and my face being buried in the damp undergrowth. Apart from the shock, I was entirely immobilized by a large weight on my shoulders and an insistent growling which slowly got closer to my neck. Now, I'm not the type to go quietly into the night. My brain processed a number of smart-ass responses to this dastardly attack, any of which were quite funny and manly. What escaped my lips, however, sounded more like a groan, maybe a whimper, if you wanted to be really unkind. A long couple of seconds later, I could feel a hot breath on my neck, and a guttural voice rasped in my ear.
Why should I let you live,
At this point, I had to admit that I was pretty goddamn happy that exogenics didn't go the 100% when it came to realism. Otherwise, there would probably have been a small puddle spreading beneath me. As it was, a couple of synapses finally fired. I remembered that this was a damn game, and I managed to turn my head just a bit and respond. Please, I don't have anything, but if you're a robber, you can have it all. I don't even know where I am right now, so if you're gonna kill me, go ahead and get it over with. The growling subsided a bit and then turned into a rasping sort of cough, and the creature moved off my back. The noise increased in loudness until I realized that it was actually laughing.
Damn, but I love putting the fear of lying into you bloody newcomers. Now get up already, and welcome to Grant's Crossing.
Chapter 5. Temper. Hesitatingly, I got to my feet and got a good look at my assailant. My psyche had been busy imagining some sort of werewolf, with a bucket full of sharp teeth and a mouth overflowing with slobber. Turns out my mind wasn't that far from the target. It had just overshot by about a meter of height and 50 kilos of muscle. The creature standing there, still grinning that annoying grin, was a 1.4-meter-tall humanoid that looked like a bad mix between a werewolf, your common house rat, and an assassin from Dungeons & Dragons, all dressed up in soft black leather.
Now, what are you looking at me like that for? Don't tell me. Apart from being a newcomer in these parts, you've never seen a ratling before? Well, look till your eyes bleed, honey. You aren't going to find a more perfect specimen this side of the Plateau of Sorrows. The name's Othel. Oh, and I suspect I owe you a small apology about the rough treatment, but to be fair, there are all sorts of bandits sneaking about in these parts, and you don't exactly dress like the fanciest of sorts.
Looking closely at Othel again, I absorbed a few new pieces of information. 1. His name tag, Othel, conveniently floating above his head, was outlined in green, which meant that he wasn't going to bite my head off right this very moment. 2. Right below that, it said, Reputation, liked. Seemed my universally welcomed trait worked just fine. Most importantly, 3. As chatty as he was, he could probably guide me exactly where I wanted to go. Oh, and 4, his attack had just given me my first skill in-game, so yay. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Unarmored Dodge. Equipping armor for combat is not always the best option or even an option. You have learned how to better take a hit or avoid it entirely while unarmored. Every skill point in Unarmored Dodge will increase the chance of deflecting attacks at diminished damage or avoiding them entirely. Stat, Agility. I shook my head. Never mind all that, Ethel. It was an honest mistake on your part, and I'm not the kind to hold a grudge. My name's Arcangelo. Maybe you could answer a few questions for me, and we'll call it even?
Sure, no problem, Archie.
He gave me a grin, which again showed off a disconcerting number of teeth, but seemed friendly enough for all that.
I'm guessing that those questions are practical in nature. Where do I sleep? Where do I find work? How do I increase my skills and stuff like that?
More or less, yeah. Basically, I need to find the local bank office and then locate the closest portal office. His eyebrows shot upwards, quite the expressive maneuver on a face that is 1/3 eyebrows, and he started walking, waving me onwards towards a small gate in the wooden palisade.
I didn't realize that you were somebody important. You could have fooled me with those clothes and that scrawny physique, but that just shows you never know. Why, once I met this little dwarf fellow, nothing to him and dirty to boot. Turns out that he...
I zoned out from his chatter and took in the glory of Grant's Crossing as he unlocked the gate and led me through to the village itself. The size of the village wasn't exactly daunting. The palisade engulfed a total of 100 houses at most. Most of the houses looked pretty solid and built to last, constructed entirely by solid timber planks, while a few were ramshackle buildings, looking like they could collapse from the slightest breeze. None of the houses were overly large. The largest building was a 3-story building, and only a handful had more than one floor. Overall, the village looked like one of the villages I'd seen in an edutainment game where you explored Alaska a couple of 100 years ago. Primitive, and not very inviting. Also, it was very telling that the entirety of the village was kept inside the bounds of the palisade, except a few fields right on the outside. It probably wasn't the safest place in the world. I followed Ethel's lead and tried to jump back into the conversation, which was easier said than done. Hazarding a guess, he was probably telling me about some of the interpersonal relationships in the village, and I'd missed the introduction. His steps, however, didn't deviate a bit, but led us straight to one of the larger and nicer houses. A 2-story house, well-maintained and well-lit. This one sported a nicely painted sign in the window, advocating the owner's or owners' occupations. Mayor Artoria Dernfuddle, bank office, portal office, scribe, and official notations.
Go on ahead, Archie. Just knock and ask Derny to help you out. She's a bit confused sometimes and a bit of a grouch, but she's always ready to help people, especially when you pay for her services.
All right, Ethel. Thanks a lot for the chat and for not hurting me any more than you did. I gave him a grin so he knew there were no hard feelings. I'll be sure to return and check in on the village at some point. Not bloody likely, but hey, you've got to give a man some credit for the effort. I could practically feel the stress from the last couple of days flowing out of me. In mere moments, I'd be off to better straits, and my plans would come to fruition. I knocked on the door and stood back for a bit, trying, unsuccessfully, to remove some of the dirt that I got on me when Ethel jumped me, and waited as patiently as possible. Seriously, those lice were getting pretty insistent. The door opened, and the town's mayor appeared. From the name, I'd already guessed the mayor's race, a gnome, but there was no doubting that this was one of the more impressive specimens of the species. She was dressed in a full-length midnight blue robe with discreet silver stitching and a stiff collar, and even her diminutive figure, about 1.3 meters of height and slim, didn't do anything to diminish her impressive appearance. Words like stately and queenly bearing instantly sprang to mind. Her face, while quite comely, was set in a guarded and expectant expression.
Ah, a newcomer to our village. Welcome. How may I help you, Mr.?
She took in my appearance, which probably didn't do anything for my first impression. "Thank you very much for the kind greeting. It is very nice to meet you. My name is Arcangelo, and I'm truly sorry for the way I come before you. This is my first day in the area, and your town security rather got the jump on me." I grinned sheepishly and gave a show of brushing off a few specks of dirt.
Well met, Mr. Arcangelo. I must apologize for the spirited welcome you have received. But once you have had the chance to familiarize yourself with the surroundings, I am most confident that you will understand that a certain measure of precaution is advisable. We are not exactly overwhelmed with traveling visitors such as you, but have no worries. We will do our utmost to make you feel at home.
She glanced sideways at Othel for a second, and he suddenly got very busy looking at his feet. Most likely, his enthusiastic approach to defense wasn't entirely in the job description. I was momentarily distracted, however, by the pop-up that appeared in my sight. "You have been offered to set your respawn point to Grant's Crossing. As you do not currently have a respawn point, this has been automatically accepted." I chuckled softly under my breath. In about half an hour from now, I'd be able to change it again to a real town. I turned back to the mayor. "While I very much appreciate the welcome, Miss Durnfuddle, I will not be staying long. I would very much like to make use of your banking services, and afterwards, I would love to see which portal connections you have available, if you could possibly find the time in your schedule." From my time playing a rogue, I'd adopted one old adage: when in Rome, do as the Romans do. If you are talking with a street dealer, break out the street slang and swear a lot. If you are talking with the serious, formal mayor of a 5-horse town, be polite, kind, and talk quietly. It costs you nothing, and basically, the better NPCs like you, the better rewards you might get. And the reverse is true as well. Also, if you talk to a street dealer like I had just done to the mayor, odds are you might get shivved. Exegetics tends to encourage immersion into the game and role-playing pretty heavy-handedly. I've heard many players complain about this fact, but honestly, I don't mind at all. I like the challenge of having to adapt quickly to new situations and social challenges. Not to mention, I'm pretty good at it. The mayor preceded me into her house, and after cleaning my shoes on the welcome mat, I stepped into a foyer that matched the mayor's appearance, neat, meticulously clean, and quite small. The foyer held 3 closed doors, with each having their sign, and a small staircase leading upwards, presumably to her private quarters. She opened the door with the sign stating in bold, flowing handwriting, "Bank Office." No surprise there. What did surprise me was the feeling of déjà vu that hit me upon entering, as the office was surprisingly similar to the VP's office at my workplace. Well, former workplace, anyway. The differences were small. The books were on economics instead of trade finance, the interior less gaudy, and she had actually placed a second chair in front of her desk. Kind of her. Oh, and the computer and telephone were replaced by a crystal ball. She took her seat behind her desk, her chair being quite a bit higher than the other, allowing her to be at face level with her customers. She waited for me to take the other chair, folded her hands in front of her, and gave me a short, professional smile.
Now, how may I be of assistance to you, Mr. Arcangelo?
I gave her a satisfied smile before responding. I could practically feel the stress of the last few days oozing off of me, disappearing like fog before the morning sun. The last thing I'd done before going to work a final time to make sure the funds cleared was linking my account into which the millions would ultimately be transferred to my World of Chains account. This made sure that I had full access to the money in-game and would be able to spend however much I pleased on, well, pleasure. I would like to make a small withdrawal from my account, let's say 10,000 gold. The mayor gave a small nod, made a short, intricate gesture with her left hand, and whispered a quiet word. Slowly, the crystal ball filled up with a warm yellowish light, and I could see small characters appearing within. She seemed to read something within the haze, nodded to herself a few times, and took a few notes with a small quill on a piece of paper in front of her. She finally placed both hands on the crystal ball, and the lights slowly faded away. She looked me straight in the eye and cleared her throat.
Dear Mr. Arcangelo, I can see from the balance on your account that you have substantial funds available. Unfortunately, I cannot allow you access at this very moment.
She made an apologetic sound, continuing in a reasonable voice.
Oh, I am sure everything is in order. However, it would appear that the account is blocked currently due to some slight legal questions. Some missing documentation, it would appear.
I shook my head violently, dismissing the all-too-vivid image of me putting copies of my passport and other credentials in a DHL courier envelope on the kitchen table and planning to send them to the bank. Surely, I must have sent them to the bank. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure and failing. I could almost feel my carefully conceived plan falling apart in front of my hands because of some tiny detail I had omitted during the flurry of activity. I tried to gather my thoughts and spoke through clenched lips. Surely, there must be some mistake. You can see I have the money, right? And that it's my account? Her lips tightened a bit, and she responded formally.
Yes, your solvency is not the issue here, sir. Unfortunately, my hands are tied. The company rules are very clear on these instances. And please note that we are not the one blocking access. Your bank is. I am sure that if you consider our position, you'll concede that—
I spat the words at the mayor, interrupting. Are you kidding me?
I beg your pardon?
She backed up a bit in her chair, and her businesslike expression turned into a frown. Another pop-up. I dismissed it instantly. Are you seriously sitting there in your ridiculous clown chair and telling me that I can't access my own money because of some goddamn lawyer technicality?
Mr. Arcangelo, I don't make the rules, I only enforce them. I can assure you—
Oh, shut up with the empty catchphrases already, I interrupted. Another pop-up. Just give me my goddamn money, and I'll leave you and this god-forsaken shithole behind, and we'll both be the happier for it. Another. The next few minutes really weren't pretty. I don't often lose my temper, but this time I went completely ballistic. I started shouting at the poor gnome, worked my way to yelling obscenities, and in the end, when things had really started deteriorating, I figured out that she was a summoner. When she shouted something unintelligible, and an incorporeal presence manhandled me out of the office and gave me the boot from the front door into the street. When my aching body finally came to rest, I once again had the dubious pleasure of looking up at Othel, who was currently looking down on me with a disapproving frown. He said,
I thought you were a decent type. Why'd you go ahead and act like that? I could hear your screaming from down here. You could forget about getting any help from me unless you clean up your act.
Chapter 6. In the Mud. I watched Othel disappearing from my soft resting place in the muddy street. Crap. Wow, that went well. I sat up, moved my aching body to the side of the street, and leaned against the wall of the mayor's house. At this point, I thought I'd better simmer down a bit, take a status of my new situation, and carefully think about what the hell I ought to do now. I was sitting in the mud in Hicksville, population 300 or so. My body was battered and bruised, although at least the bruises had almost healed. Non-lethal damage heals very quickly. All clothes and equipment I owned was of lousy quality, and I didn't know anything at all about my new hometown. And I had just called the one person able to open a portal to a decent place, something that would make parents anywhere cover their children's ears. Not the most uplifting start, really. My character build didn't really improve upon the situation. While I'd be the guest of honor in just about any crowd, it didn't really look like Grant's Crossing had ever hosted any crowds. Additionally, from what Othel had said, the outskirts of the village were probably swarming with mobs, and my character wasn't built for combat. At all. I took an overview of one of the pop-ups I'd dismissed earlier. Your reputation with Mayor Atoria Durnfuddle has decreased by -500. New reputation, 500. Neutral. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has decreased by -250. New reputation, 750. Neutral. 6 additional pop-ups left my reputation with the mayor at minus 3,400 despised, and with Grant's Crossing at minus 1,200 disliked. I had to reread the whole thing twice in order to fully understand just how much I'd screwed up. Not only had I alienated the one person who'd actually be able to make me a portal to a real town, but in so doing, I'd also pissed off the entire village. Just my luck. Thing is, when your reputation with certain key figures, and this can mean key figures of a town, an organization, or even a race or class, changes, it has a smaller impact on the larger group as well. Of course, this is usually a good thing. Save the princess and the kingdom loves you. Well, that goes the other way around as well, apparently. At least, judging from Ethel's parting comments, he would be willing to aid me, if only I raised my standing with the village. At this low point, my options, as I in my shell-shocked state perceived them, were 1. Throw in the towel. Skip the dream of debauchery and damsels, go back to the real world, hide out for 10 days, maybe beg for the money to survive, and then create a new character who'd actually be able to fight and then have fun just playing the next 2 years. 2. Take a huge goddamn chance. Go back to the real world, sneak my way over to my supposedly safe apartment, send the documentation to my bank, and go back for my vacation. 3. Spend the next couple of years playing it safe. Forget about the girls and gambling, gain a crafter profession, and earn my keep that way. Maybe earn enough to get a portal to a real city and become a bard for real. 4. Change of plans. Try to salvage this character and adapt it into a combat character. Gain a few levels and pump agility and endurance enough to get a halfway decent rogue wannabe with maybe some distance weapons. 5. Figure it out. Somehow find a way to make this character work, even in a small village such as this one. I spent a short while contemplating the possibilities, and finally went for option 6. Get stinking drunk. Chapter 7. Reparations. If I really had to say something positive about Grant's Crossing, it'd be this. It was entirely impossible to get lost. Seriously, if you stood up in the middle of the town square, which was quite small and not square at all, and turned full circle, you'd have a perfect overview of the entire town except for the Rivermaster's house. This is why, 10 minutes from having taken one of the most intelligent decisions of my life, getting drunk, that is, not calling the mayor a prancing midget with inflated self-esteem, I was blowing the excess foam from my third ale of the evening. It was a dark home-brewed ale with a lovely aftertaste that also granted me a 30-minute +3 buff to charisma. Already my situation seemed less intimidating. Turns out that the barkeep was willing to barter for my health potions. Selling them gave me ale for the evening, a warm meal, and a place to sleep for the night. Oh, and another skill. After negotiating with the barkeep, I had received a pop-up. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Barter. Your bargaining skills have resulted in a better deal for you. Every skill point in barter will increase the potential for achieving better prices and negotiating better deals. Stat: Charisma. Seems I'd made a pretty good deal. The skill had even increased 47% towards the next level. I looked around the tavern, already slightly tipsy. This might be just the ale talking, but the tavern was the first part of the village that I actually liked. The tavern itself was a large 2-story solid timber building, well crafted but with few embellishments. It was, however, well maintained, and the tavern sign and entrance door were welcoming contrasts to the stark functionality of the building. The tavern sign framed over the door was skillfully painted, sporting the name The Warlock's End, and the door frame itself was carved on all sides with engraved figures which seemed to be telling a story about the namesake of the tavern. In the tavern, dark, oft-polished round tables were scattered across the room, and candles and candle holders on the wall and in a single central cast-iron chandelier provided the only light to penetrate the smoke haze hanging among the ceiling, resulting in an intimate, warm glow throughout the room. On one side of the room, stairs led both up to the second story and down to the cellar. And on the other side of the room, an unused low stage was wasting space, holding only some stacked chairs and tables. The eye was automatically drawn to the back of the room, where a low bar ran along the back wall, emanating a low pulsating light. Once you got closer, you could see that the entire bar front was composed of a dark, semi-transparent material which felt like marble but was filled with small gems of varying sizes, which flickered and burned like real tiny flame tongues buried within the desk itself. Truth be told, initially I didn't even look around, just went straight to the bar and started haggling. However, as the alcohol started working its way into my system, I felt like talking with someone. Anyone, really. I've always been told that drinking alone means that you have a problem, and since I didn't want to be that guy, I decided to join some of the other fellows. No luck there. For a short moment there, I'd forgotten about my disliked reputation status with Grant's Crossing and what that might mean for me. In practice, it meant that the trio dicing at one of the tables told me to piss off, the two slightly more well-clad people in the room told me to buzz off, the grown-ups are talking. And one large, gloomy-looking potato-nosed farmer type actually threatened me with physical violence. Oh, and the smelly drunk on the bench said something that sounded suspiciously like,
"Bugger your mother."
But that might just be part of his rant against the world in general. I wasn't entirely drunk enough to forget about my abysmal stats, and ended up doing what every sane person does when he's feeling down: complain to the bartender. Gillum Drizzlefog seemed like a truly remarkable individual. He was a swarthy character with a dark mane of blown dry hair straight out of a bad action movie, with a few gray hairs interspersed among the rest, an open and inviting face with a dazzling smile and bright blue eyes. Add to that an impressive physique and a winning personality, and any gnome in the neighborhood, and probably a number of non-gnomes as well, had better lock their daughters up. He was also, after I'd explained my problems, pretty unimpressed by my plight.
First, you come to our town uninvited. Then you slander our mayor, who has never in her life harmed anybody. And now you were looking for sympathy? Sad to say, mate, but that is not going to happen. I'll serve you any drink you want, but if you want company, you had better seek it elsewhere. Also, if you try to raise any trouble here, you'll have to deal with the law.
He pointed behind him where a large wooden mace hung on the wall. The shaft looked polished by use, and the words, "The Law," were written in large, bold letters along the shaft. At this point, I was slowly realizing that if I did intend to stick it out in Grant's Crossing, I'd have to make some friends. And if I couldn't get along with the charismatic, friendly bartender, I probably didn't have any chance whatsoever with the remainder of the population. I did all that, didn't I? I mused out loud as if to myself. The thing is, Mr. Drizzlefog, today has been a monumentally bad day for me. I'm not saying this to try to garner any sympathy from you. I've acted like an arse today, and I'll own up to that. I would, however, like to think that I wouldn't have acted like this under normal circumstances, but again, that's neither here nor there. Please bear with me. I do have a point that I'm trying to make. At this point, I activated my high tide skill, watching my charisma soar to an impressive 40, not bad for a level 1 character, and hoped for the best. My point being that I hope there is anything I can help you with that can make you realize that I am really not trying to be a troublemaker. I kept my face carefully neutral and waited for his answer. His face was expressionless, his eyes downcast as he pondered my question. I kept a nervous eye on the counter of my high tide skill. What if he didn't answer in time? Would the skill count or not?
Well, I suppose I wouldn't like to turn someone away without giving them a chance to prove their conviction. How about this? You give me a hand when I need it. Cleaning, cooking, changing the beds, or whatever springs to mind. And if I find that you do a decent job of it, I'll make sure to pass the word along to whoever might ask me. What do you say?
You have been offered a quest. No idle hands in this place. repeatable. Gillum Drizzlefog asks you to perform varying tasks around the tavern until he deems the work to be complete. Reward, 150 experience points, plus 250 reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog. Accept or decline. Hastily, I clicked accept. Thank you very much, Mr. Drizzlefog. You won't regret it. Where should I start? For the next 2 hours, I did exactly what the bartender asked of me. Peeled potatoes until my soft hands felt like they were dissolving, mopped down all floors on the second floor, and distributed the tables and chairs from the low stage in time for the evening rush. Wiping the sweat off my forehead, I approached the bartender and asked, "What's next, Mr. Drizzlefog?" He chuckled and gave me a wooden platter with a spoon and ale on the side.
My thanks for the good work, a dinner break, and a chat before the evening rush. How's that sound?
Congratulations, you have completed the quest. No idle hands in this place. Repeatable. Gillum Drizzlefog is satisfied with the effort you have delivered. Reward, you have received 150 experience points. Experience to next level, 150 out of 1,000. Your reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog has increased by 250. New reputation, minus 950, neutral. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 125. New reputation, minus 1,075, disliked. I returned his smile. That sounds just great, Mr. Drizzlefog. I was getting pretty hungry. I sat down at one of the free tables, praising my lucky star. With this repeatable quest, I'd be able to return my reputation with Grant's Crossing to neutral with just one more quest, and that made a world of difference for someone like me. At disliked or below, you were generally presented with pretty few quests, and additionally, those you did receive were usually either repeatable, slay a dozen of insert variable mob here and return, or truly difficult quest chains, sometimes even both. At neutral, the populace usually started opening up to you and introducing you to some of the more interesting quests and sometimes even social quests that even someone like me, who was, let's go with, combat impaired, had a chance of acing. He returned a moment later with a generous serving of boar ribs and ale for himself and sat down on the other side of the table. I continued eating, but could feel his gaze upon me for a while. He put down his ale and softly cleared his throat.
So, we've got 10 minutes at least before the Keelan brothers are off their shift at the river to spoil the relative peace we have in here. I'd say that with your labor, you've earned the chance to explain your side of the story. From what I've seen so far, you don't really seem the type to just blow up and be disrespectful without reason or provocation.
Unfortunately, I couldn't just come clean and tell him everything, even if I wanted to. NPCs in World of Chains are a true technological marvel, an impressive mixture of programming skills and technological impossibilities. During the beta, NPCs were very limited, basically only as clever as their programming, more or less on the same level as the other games at the time. The scope and audacity of the Exogenics programmers at the time is honestly somewhat scary. What they did was this. An unknown number of players were given a special offer. They could play for free for the first 6 months, if Exogenics was allowed to monitor them without any limitations whatsoever. Exogenics has released just one article which was very sparing with the details, but apparently they monitored more or less everything about these players, from their physical characteristics over their linguistic tendencies to the choices they made. Spread over thousands of different situations, social, martial, and otherwise, over the 6-month period. After assembling all of this data, and I shudder to think of the amount of data they had to collect and sift through, somehow they managed to actually gather this into templates for NPCs. This meant that every NPC in the world was actually based on a real person and acted, to a shocking degree, in the same way that humans do, up to and including what appears to be free will. There's only one golden rule. There's no breaking the fourth wall. If you, in any manner, try to talk or even hint to an NPC about something in the real world, the NPC will blank out for a short while, and you will be punished. Random loss of reputation, losing money, item deterioration, health loss. Anything is possible. Exogenics takes the role-playing experience very seriously and goes to great lengths to ensure that nothing breaks the genuineness of the gaming experience. Sure, you could act the buffoon and joke around with your friends all you wanted in-game, but do it in front of NPCs, and it would have consequences. I sighed. The truth is, Mr. Drizzlefog, that I've only just arrived in the town a few hours ago with the perfect plan readied for living a life of leisure in the big city. I just failed to think it all the way through, and some small legality made my plan virtually impossible. And since your mayor was the bearer of this bad news, she's the one I lost my temper at, in a bad way. He snorted.
I never had any doubt about that last part. I could hear you yelling all the way over here. And while you'd better get used to the fact that everybody in this town loves our mayor and you'd be well served by treating her civilly, there's no doubt whatsoever that she does love her rules and regulations.
He gave me a lopsided smile.
You might as well call me Gillum. I've got this feeling that I'll be seeing more of you.
I gave him a wide smile. Even knowing that he was just a program, it was damn hard not to like him. We enjoyed an ale together in silence, and I was probably starting to get a bit tipsy again. When Gillum started to get up, I looked him in the eye and asked him something that had been roving in the back of my mind for a bit. I truly appreciate you giving me a chance, Gillum. I promise you I'll make it up to you. Now, before I start getting truly drunk and melancholic about all my wasted plans, there's one question I've been meaning to ask you. I hope you don't mind. The stage you have there, is it just for show? He stopped and turned, apparently a bit surprised by my question.
Why? Are you an actor?
No, a bard, actually. I've had a lot of practice by myself, but I'm only just starting out performing in front of people, and I just thought to myself, well, that a bard who still has a great deal to learn is better than no bard at all. He started grinning again, scratching his neck.
I might have to agree with you on that part. Only, I don't see your instrument. Isn't that part of the package, usually?
Yeah, I admitted, hanging my head. That's about the first thing you receive when you arrive at a town and talk to the resident bardmaster or instructor, and there's usually one in every town. For a second, Gillum's smile turned into a slight frown. I wondered what that might mean. Now, usually these instructors are quite willing to teach you the basics and even provide you with a learning instrument. If, however, one were to piss off half of the village upon arrival, I let my explanation trail off. Gillum just looked at me for a while. Then he snorted, and for a second looked surprised at his own reaction. This led into a burst of laughter escaping him and slowly evolving into a full-blown laughing fit, his head thrown backwards and face going dark red while he tried putting his hands over his mouth to contain it. I just sat there, completely embarrassed, my face growing redder by the second. But when I looked at him, almost bursting from trying to contain his amusement, I couldn't help but stifle a grin at his full-throat infectious laughter. Seconds later, I was laughing along with Gillum, cackling with laughter at the impressiveness of how completely I'd screwed up my situation. After a while, we both calmed down a bit, and, wiping a tear from each eye, Gillum said, still grinning,
Boy, you don't screw around when you screw up, now do you?
He looked over the bemuscled, scary-looking bastard who'd threatened me with violence earlier and yelled,
Kiff, hold the fort for 10 minutes, and by Tharlin's hairy ears, just leave the stew alone. No attempts at cooking this time.
The brute didn't look too happy, but that might just be his default expression, and he did meander over behind the bar where he promptly poured a beer for himself. The question was most likely evident from my face because turning towards the stairs, he said,
Kiff is the bouncer here. He's as lazy as they come, but he's dependable. And what's most important,
he winked,
he's cheap labor. Now, you just follow me, and we'll see what we can do about your little predicament.
We walked together companionably towards the cellar and went down the stairs. I let my hand slide over the engravings covering the railing on the staircase. It was beautiful artwork. Clearly, a lot of effort had been put into the woodwork of the tavern. The cellar was small, with a dirt floor and a tiny hallway leading into 4 rooms. Their proportions had clearly been built with a gnome in mind, and as a result were slightly claustrophobic to me. I had to constantly keep my head down in order to avoid bashing my skull on the ceiling or door frame. Gillum led me straight towards one of the rooms and unlocked the door, a simple door made in pine. A quick glance had showed that only one of the remaining doors were locked, and also reinforced by steel bands. But I repressed my natural curiosity and followed Gillum into a decently sized room, with ceiling-high shelves on all sides and a many-tubed monstrosity of iron and steam in the middle. Placing himself to the side of the room, he said,
"The still's off limits, but the rest of this garbage is yours for the digging. You are looking at 15 years of accumulated lost and found. If somebody has ever lost something at the bottom of a beer, it's in here somewhere. I'll let you borrow whichever instrument you'd like for the evening, and even do you one better. If you impress me on the stage tonight, I'll let you keep the instrument and whatever tips you might earn. And I might even throw in a little extra."
"You have been offered a quest. The show must begin. Gillum Drizzlefog has allowed you to choose an instrument from the lost and found and perform on stage, and he will reward you according to your success. Reward unknown. Accept or decline." Wide-eyed, I quickly accepted the quest and mumbled something vaguely grateful. I had been caught completely by surprise. Quests like this, with variable rewards, were pretty rare and varied greatly, both in scope and reward, but some of the best rewards my rogue had received came from quests with variable rewards where I'd managed to excel. Back in the beta, however, they had usually been limited to special class quests and the like. Gillum disappeared up the stairs, and I turned full circle, trying to get an overview of the contents. I quickly realized that this was entirely impossible. The shelves were completely cluttered with items, and this, combined with the dust covering most of the items, resulted in a uniformly chaotic mass of items. I had better just get digging. I decided to gather all instruments I found into a pile for itself. That way I'd be able to decide later just what my options were. Some 45 minutes and several cubic meters of dust later, I'd come to the realization that the good people of Grant's Crossing most likely hated music. I'd probably amassed enough instruments to be able to outfit every man, woman, and child in the village. A tambourine, 2 guitars, a half-harp, a banjo, a frigging accordion, and more than 10 different flutes, ranging from your hand-carved children's flute to an impressive piece of art, which, if my memory served me correctly, was a double bassoon, were spread out on the floor in front of me, along with a few other even more obscure pieces. Finger cymbals? Really? If only I hadn't forgotten my harem at home. I only had a single stack of shelves to go, and was feeling pretty optimistic about myself. I was no virtuoso with a guitar, but skilled enough that I was pretty sure I'd be able to entertain a small crowd, and at the very least beat the alternative. No music at all, just alcohol and your own miserable company. Luckily, my voice hadn't changed at all in-game. I had a decent singing voice, but I definitely wasn't skilled enough to do an all-acoustic performance. My old violin teacher once told me,
"A good and strong singing voice can hide almost all atrocities you commit on your poor instrument. You're not here to perform, are you, though, Danny? You're here to learn to play. So shut that trap of yours."
But luckily, he wasn't here tonight. And I felt pretty confident that something like Stairway to Heaven for an intro while they were eating their dinner, and then something a bit livelier, House of the Rising Sun, followed by Smoke on the Water, perhaps, and something quite a bit rowdier for later in the evening, like Whiskey in the Jar maybe, should do the trick. I was already trying to pick through my poor memory for the correct chords for some of the songs when I noticed a battered guitar case that had fallen behind the shelves. I debated just leaving it there. One of the 2 guitars I'd found was more than good enough for my skill level already, but I've never been able to temper my curiosity. Folding myself under the stack of shelves, I was able to slide my right leg all the way under to slowly guide the case out. Covered in dust, the guitar case was made from some undefined, poorly cured animal skin which had most likely at some time been black, and one of the hinges had fallen off and been replaced with string. When I opened the lid and looked at the contents, my mouth went dry, and my world seemed to freeze for a moment. You can learn a lot just from looking at a violin. Does it have scuff marks on the back from being tossed aside carelessly? Is it in pristine condition? Or does the color of the neck vary slightly where the left hand has handled it a countless number of times? Has it been regularly maintained or left to deteriorate? There was no denying that this violin had lived a long, hard life with massive wear, but nevertheless, it was still beautiful. The old spruce soundboard could probably tell 100 stories with dozens of scuff marks and even a single mark which looked suspiciously like the point of a dagger had been embedded into the front. The wood was heavily stained with use, and it would never win a beauty competition, but the quality of the instrument still stood out. Lifting the violin and bow out of the guitar case, which had a dark velvet interior molded to keep the violin in place and a compartment for extra strings, spare pegs, and other paraphernalia, I reverently held the chin rest in place and softly let the bow flow over the strings in turn, checking whether each string was in tune, which, miraculously, they were. At this point, I came to my senses for a second. Of course they were in tune. This is a game, and there is no natural deterioration unless it's programmed into the game. The sheer, mind-boggling realism of the instrument had just thrown me back into the real world for a bit. I checked the item description. Violin, unidentified. So tiny it probably could have run between the wolf's legs while standing upright. Though scuffed and worn, the level of workmanship that has gone into the construction of this violin is still easily spotted. The strings and pegs are of a high quality, and the instrument still has a lot of life left in it. Workmanship? Good. Durability? 57 out of 60. Well, that didn't help me much. I couldn't see what magic abilities the violin had. No way of using them until the instrument had been identified, and no one to help me with the identification. It did raise my curiosity, though. I quickly looked at the descriptions of the rest of the instruments, but the best alternative was a regular rosewood guitar whose workmanship was of average quality. Even if I hadn't preferred a violin over a guitar, they didn't even compare. I quickly packed all the other instruments back on the shelves, put the violin and case into my inventory, probably my favorite part of being in a game. You just will the item into your inventory and suddenly, you don't have to worry about carrying it. It's there, ready to remove whenever you feel like it. If you need more slots in your inventory, you just buy bigger bags. And walked upstairs to Gillum. I'm ready. When would you like me to start? He looked me up and down. Well, mainly up. I wasn't going to crack any small person jokes today, and said,
Took your time, but I suppose now's as good a time as any. Almost everyone in the village is here, and most are busy with their dinner. You can try your luck while they eat, and if you don't get booed off stage, it probably means that they like your performance.
Nodding, I moved towards the small stage. Lost in thoughts, I had forgotten all about the public's general dislike for me and was lost in the realm of possibilities, wondering how best to approach the locals and how to catch and retain their attention. As a child, my instructor had insisted that I should receive a classical instruction. This meant all the classics, Bach, Mendelssohn, Tchaikovsky, Paganini, and of course the composer I'd since then chosen as my namesake in-game, Arcangelo Corelli. My parents thought that I needed an outlet, and seeing as I was a relatively intelligent, introverted, and sensitive kid, they thought the best way for me to get to know other people and become more social was to play the violin. Parents. Sometimes so clever, yet at other times utterly bereft of sense. I played for a couple years just to please them, but at some point, late at night, the internet led me unknowingly to a live video of a gypsy-style duo playing with violins and cymbalum, and this video taught me a number of things about the violin. One, A person who is truly invested in playing the violin can summon a level of passion with his music in himself and his surroundings that, to me, is unparalleled. 2. Playing the violin by memorizing every chord and passage in a song was not for me. Playing by letting the flow of your song, your feelings, or your group take you wherever they wanted, however, was. I still attended my instructor a few years afterwards, and to this day, I still have a good number of the classics and even a decent number of pop songs memorized. But what stayed with me through ups and downs for all the intervening years was the ability to forget my troubles for a while and just play. To start a song with no real notion of what I was going to play and just move with the flow, letting the song evolve through my hands with no active intervention from my brain. I climbed the stage, put the opened violin case down in front of me, took a deep breath, and gently let the music flow from my fingers. The song evolved slowly, starting as a softly flowing stream, low, warm tones hardly intruding upon the listeners at all. I let it slowly build, ever so slowly, until a few heads were turning my way. Then I let the rhythm become stronger and started playing slightly louder, letting the song slide slowly out from the background noise to gently catch the crowd's attention. Still slow, warm, weaving tones, nothing to break people's conversation, just enough to make a foot tap here, an elderly dwarf push his empty plate away and turn his chair my way. A couple of minutes later, when I felt that the crowd was ready to pay attention without intruding too harshly, I let the music change mood, bubbling slowly into a happy, light celebration of life. Feeling completely energized by the airy, flowing cadence that drifted from the strings, I allowed my happiness to flow into the music, keeping the notes light and happy, almost delicate, never settling on a single rhythm for too long before moving on to another. A kid at one table was tapping happily along with the tune, and his mother appeared lost in thought, hand stroking his hair with a thoughtful smile on her face. Allowing the tempo and intensity of the song to incrementally increase, the joyful melody leaped out into the room in lively, sweeping tones. I was entirely lost to the music at this point, and spared no glance for the room, simply enjoyed the chance to lose myself into my passion for the first time in a long while. When I am entirely absorbed in playing, I often fail to note the passing of time. But after a while, I gradually allowed the music to grow more somber, moving gradually from the happy, flowing tones into darker, angrier passages. I coaxed the anger into fury and ever upwards, reaching a frenzied, almost feverish pitch. After a while, the build-up had reached a pitch where I felt that I couldn't hold it for a second longer, and I let it flow over into overwhelming sadness. Long, sweeping tones, almost crying out at the unfairness of it all. Over a long minute, I gradually let the sadness subside and let the music fade out from existence, and my own awareness of the tavern return as I slowly looked up from the violin to the room beyond, which was completely, unnaturally quiet. Before this moment, I hadn't noticed that the room had filled up almost completely and that all eyes were on me. The silence lingered for a second, and then the room broke out in a thunderous roaring applause. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Musician. Your musical skills may affect the people around you, causing people to like you better and new possibilities to surface. Every skill point in musician will increase the impact that your music has on the audience. Stat, charisma. Musician skill has increased to level 2, 39% progress to next level. I didn't notice the pop-ups to begin with, since a number of people crowded the small stage, thanking me profusely, and some even tossing coins into the violin case. However, after a couple of minutes, the hubbub had died down and I was able to thank the last of the crowd, an utterly adorable half-elven grandmother who kept saying that the ending was too sad, and quickly glance at the pop-ups. 1 extra skill level in musician already? Nice! And approach Gillum. Strangely, he didn't look pleased at all. Actually, he looked somewhat constipated, really. It didn't exactly look like his face was used to bearing an unhappy expression, and the look did not appear natural on him at all. I decided to avoid the worst of the embarrassment and get straight to the point. Listen, Gillum, if you don't like the violin, that's okay. It's not for everyone. I can go get a guitar, and I'll probably be able to play some halfway decent songs for the crowd. Truth be told, I care much more about your approval than that of the crowd. I probably laid it on a little thick, but seeing as how he owned the, so far, only access to building a better rep with the village, I really wanted to get on his good side. That seemed to soothe his mind a little.
Do you seriously think I didn't like your music? I haven't heard a fiddler as talented as you since our resident bard quit playing.
He sighed and threw his hands up in frustration.
Listen, as a tavern owner, you learn to be really adaptable and get used to the weirdest stuff. Seriously, you wouldn't believe me if I started telling you about some of the stuff that's happened here over the past 35 years. That's why I'm a man of very few principles. I don't give credit, and I keep my word. That's it. And now, without even meaning to, you've made me break one of them.
Obviously, he could see from the look on my face that I was drawing a complete blank.
Right. You're fresh to the village. The thing is, up until almost a year ago, we had a resident journeyman bard in the town, Grek Durzum. Talented guy, just as good at sweet-talking a crowd, juggling and performing magic tricks, and the fiddle was his chosen instrument. Played like a demon, he did, and I'm quite certain he also had something of a demon inside him. He would always end the night by getting drunk, truly drunk, but it quickly worsened until some days he would be drunk even before he started playing. In the end, I had to lay him off. But instead of accepting it, he gave me his fiddle and asked me to keep it safe until he was ready to get back to work. I, of course, stowed it safely on my shelves, and, well, from all the instruments on the shelves, you had to choose his and then play well enough to make the angels weep.
He nodded at the violin in my hands and sighed.
I told you clearly, if you played well enough, you'd get to keep the instrument. And now it seems I have a choice. Either I keep my word to you and let you keep the fiddle and break my word to Grek, or the other way around. Hell of a pickle I've put myself in with my careless words.
Mind working furiously, I quickly considered the possibilities. I could probably demand that he fork over the violin, but I really wanted to keep my good reputation with him. Having a magical item as a level 1 character, however, even without knowing the stats, could make a hell of a difference, though. What if... Gillum, what if there's a third alternative? The way I see it, I am definitely staying in Grant's Crossing for a while. If you lend me the violin while I'm here, and I promise to treat it right and keep it in good repair, I promise to give it back to you when I leave the village for good. Also, a violin as good as this one deserves to be played. Not just sit and gather dust on a shelf. His whole face lightening up, Gillum seemed to consider my proposal.
I believe that would work. I do feel like I'm shortchanging you on the whole deal, though.
I laughed and shot back. Well, that's easily solved. How about you throw in one extra thing? No, make that 2. He raised an eyebrow. First, I'm entirely ignorant about everything in this part of the world, so you'll allow me to pester you with any annoying question that comes to mind. 2, you help me identify the violin. I really want to know what abilities it has. He chortled and said,
I'm probably going to regret that first part, but you have yourself a deal, kiddo.
Congratulations, you have completed the quest. The show must begin. Gillum Drizzlefog, as well as the audience, are well satisfied with the performance you have put forth. Also, you managed to come to an acceptable agreement with Gillum concerning the violin. Base reward, you have received 750 experience points. Experience to the next level, 900 out of 1,000. Your reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog has increased by 1,000. New reputation, 50. Neutral. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 500. New reputation, minus 575. Neutral. Reward for extraordinary performance and a deal struck with Gillum Drizzlefog. Your reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog has increased by 500. New reputation, 550. Neutral. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 250. New reputation, minus 325. Neutral. Items received. 1 scroll, identify item. 8 silver, 6 copper. All right. I mentally patted myself on the back, keeping the violin for the time being, having it identified and a bucket full of rep and cash. It looked like perhaps my luck was finally turning. Grinning at me with barely concealed humor, Gillum quickly added,
Now, I'm going to leave you alone with a mug of ale and a shot. You've earned them both, but just to keep you on your toes, I have a proposal for you. Here's the deal. The village hasn't been the same since our bards stopped, and with all that's happened lately, we sure could use someone to liven up the atmosphere in here. If you were to pass an evening in here every other day or so entertaining the village, I'd be willing to set you up with full board and a small room for as long as the agreement lasts. Oh, and if you keep playing like this, the tips will probably also be decent.
He winked and left. You have been offered a quest. Entertainment for the masses. Gillum Drizzlefog has asked you to entertain the people attending the Warlock's End at least 3 evenings a week. The time frame of the quest is unknown. Reward: food and lodging at the tavern. Other rewards unknown. Accept or decline. I couldn't believe my luck. This was a complete no-brainer. A chance to increase my reputation with the entire town on a regular basis, which also gave me food, a place to stay, and tips. I just needed to know where to sign. I pressed accept quickly and launched into one of my favorite parts of playing, checking out the loot. First, I dug through the violin case and fished out all the tips, 8 silver and 6 copper, total. Impressive. Gillum had actually topped up the same amount that they'd given me. I might eventually come to like this old dump. Second, that was strange. Somebody had tossed an old brass key into the case and used a piece of string to tie a scroll to it. The scroll had just 4 words written in a shaky hand. Tomorrow, noon. Here. Grek. Wait a minute. Grek was the old bard, wasn't it? What the heck was that about? Never mind. It looked like I'd be able to put that thought off until tomorrow, and I was just about to get to the good stuff. I unfurled the Identify Item scroll, held the violin in my mind, and started mumbling the incantation on the scroll. Shortly, a series of small lights seemed to float from the violin like fireflies, and I was left staring at my new violin. Wellspring Violin of Charisma. Though scuffed and worn, the level of workmanship that has gone into the construction of this violin is still easily spotted. The strings and pegs are of a high quality, and the instrument still has a lot of life left in it. The violin has been enchanted to increase the wearer's charisma and act as a mana well that the owner can fill from his own reserves and then choose to draw from. Workmanship? Good. Durability? 57 out of 60. Plus 5 charisma when equipped. Mana well? 100 out of 100 mana. I was completely floored. This more than doubled my starting mana. Sure, I probably couldn't refill it on the fly without problems, such as my playing attracting all wildlife nearby. But still, if you were so lucky as to find a magic item within the first 5 levels, they were usually +1 to strength or something like that, or had a wicked level requirement. This was truly amazing luck. After spending enough time congratulating myself on my most recent luck, I had to admit that there was work to do. I had spent way too much time deviating from my original plan, getting stinking drunk. It was time to get back on track. Apparently, when you have nothing more than 6 points in endurance, the end result is that you get drunk pretty darn fast. What was left of the evening for me shortly resulted in tunnel vision, some pretty embarrassing conversations with a few of the townsfolk, trying to learn the local version of poker and failing, juggling glasses, very, very unsuccessfully, and flirting with even less success. At some point, I found myself equipped with a minor case of beer goggles, trying to follow some really localized gossip from a human farmer couple, when none other than Othel seated himself across from me. While my brain was fairly foggy, I did realize that now, where my reputation with the village was back up to neutral, I should be able to get back in his good books. Immediately, I fell over myself trying to apologize for my actions the day before. My reasoning at that point probably didn't make a lot of sense, but he did quickly wave off my apologies.
No need for all that, Archie. We've all done things we regret.
He seemed pretty sad at the thought, and I was just barely sober enough to quell my curiosity and just change the subject to something safer. With that successfully concluded, I didn't last a long time awake. Eventually, I was escorted to my chamber by Gillum and Othel. In a desperate bid to regain a small portion of sobriety and ease the following day's inevitable hangover, I threw open the shutters to get some air and played a couple of verses of The Drunken Sailor to the night forest, before I surrendered to my new bed and oblivion. Chapter 8. The Morning After. I don't drink that often, but waking up after a serious drinking binge always starts the same way for me, with a series of questions. Usually, but not always, the same questions in the same order. These questions are the following. Where am I? I wonder what'll happen if I sit up. Will my head hurt? Am I going to throw up? Am I still drunk? Feels like I'm still drunk. The answers to these questions that second day in World of Chains were as follows. My room on the floor? Hell yes. Close call, but no. And, no. Well, maybe. On this lovely morning, where the birds were chirping right outside my window, I had to add another question. What the hell, Exogenics? Why, you bastards, why? Of course, once my mind cleared a bit, the answer was simple as pie. It's not just that they love their game to be as realistic as possible, giving the player a solid hangover and a 2-hour debuff, minus 25% to endurance, intelligence, and charisma. It's also one of their many ways of stimulating the economy, with many normal NPCs offering a perfect, yet highly expensive hangover cure. Given access to my fortune, I'd have bought a stash already. But with things the way they were, I just had to tough it out. I dragged my sorry carcass down the stairs and ordered something to eat from the kid by the counter, Gillum's daytime help, supposedly, and sat down to try to think and help myself get my life in order. Reviewing my options once again, things didn't look entirely as harsh in the morning light as they had the day before. I immediately discarded the option of ditching this character and trying out my luck IRL. I had no interest whatsoever in taking my chances with a pissed-off mob boss who probably had decades of experience in locating people who really didn't want to be found. The day before, I'd also realized that I very much liked playing for an audience, and even if my plans of making the character work in combat didn't pan out, I probably wouldn't mind too much staying some months in the village just playing, gambling, and maybe doing some crafting quests, very slowly building my way back to a positive reputation with the mayor. At that point, I'd be able to get a portal to a large city, where my build would really be able to shine. That was still Plan B, though. Today, I'd first look around the rest of the tavern and the rest of the village, then see what the old drunk of a bard wanted from me, and then maybe, just maybe, try my luck with a little hack and slash. You never know. Maybe the stats wouldn't have that large an effect on my combat survivability. I decided that I'd probably be less inclined to hate the world with a solid breakfast, and over a solid side of bacon and eggs, I tried to remedy my slight money problem. I sent a ticket to the in-game World of Chains admins, explaining my situation and asking whether there was any way to solve the situation from within the game, as I'd just started my vacation and didn't want to break it off already over a small detail like this. When I'd finished the meal, my outlook on life had improved markedly, and I'd received a +2 buff to endurance, which actually brought the total up above my original 6 points, despite the debuff. Additionally, I'd noticed the pop-ups that had seemingly been blinking to the side of my vision from the night before. Pleasant surprises, really. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill, Lore. Through your discussions and investigations, you may learn new information about the world that surrounds you. This might come in handy in conversation or give you otherwise unavailable quest opportunities. Every skill point in Lore will increase the possibility of your utilizing the knowledge. Stat, Intelligence. Congratulations, you have learned a new sub-skill to Lore. Local Lore, Dawnlight Forest. You have learned new information concerning your local surroundings, be it geography, nature, customs, monsters, persons, or much else. Every skill point to your sub-skill will increase the possibility of your utilizing the knowledge and will also increase the main Lore skill, albeit slowly. Stat, Intelligence. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill, Gambling. Winning and losing at gambling, be it at dice, cards, or other games, has taught you much about tactics, looking for tells and cheaters. Every skill point in gambling will increase your prowess when gambling. Stat, Charisma. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill, Performing. Whether juggling geese, telling jokes, breathing fire, or using finger puppets, performing gives you a chance to entertain a crowd, causing people to like you better, and new possibilities to surface. Every skill point in performing will increase the impact your performance has on the audience. Stat, Charisma. Local Lore, Dawnlight Forest has increased to level 2, 17% progress to next level. Man, sometimes getting drunk was just the right life choice. What a lot of freebies. Sure, these skills weren't worth much to begin with, but when I had found a chance to increase them, they could definitely make my life easier. Also, as an added bonus, learning more about the local lore also increased the general lore skill. This meant even though there was no chance in hell that I was going to stay here, talking to the locals would also increase my knowledge about the rest of the world. Awesome. Stretching my aching body, I decided that it was about time I got a move on. To begin with, it was time to get to know my new workplace. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I'd decided that I'd best postpone walking around the city and talking to the villagers until the -25% charisma debuff had expired. Luckily, I'd woken up pretty early and should have plenty of time before noon and my mystery rendezvous with Greg. There really wasn't much to the tavern that I hadn't noticed the day before. A door next to the bar connected to a semi-large kitchen, which was empty at the moment. Apparently the kid tending the bar also took care of that during the morning shift. My room was the smallest of 5 rooms on the second floor, but still both cozy and squeaky clean, and there really wasn't anything happening around 6:30 a.m. on a Friday. I didn't see any reason to start snooping around in the cellar. They'd probably just get the wrong idea, but my memory suddenly did dredge up one small but interesting detail from the day earlier, and my curiosity forced me outside of the tavern to peer at the engravings that seemed to tell the story of the tavern. The engravings were divided into 2 sides on either side of the door. One side portraying a cloaked tall figure beside a tall tower on a hill, the warlock, while the other side portrayed a short, beautiful, clearly gnomish woman standing in front of what was clearly the tavern. From here, you could see the story evolving from the left to the right side. One carving showed the warlock spotting the woman, clearly entranced, while the woman remained oblivious. The next carvings showed the warlock courting the woman with flowers, gifts, and, well, showing off with magic, probably. It was hard to tell from the carvings. And the woman rejecting him every time. Then the warlock spotted the woman with a man and, seemingly lost his shit and threw a magical salvo at the 2 lovers, killing both. The warlock cried over the grave, and later a bunch of villagers came at him, pitchforks and all, and burned down his tower with him inside, with the tower collapsing on his head. Wow. A bit more grim fairy tales than Disney. Curious, and with a bit of time to kill, I chatted up the kid tending the bar. It didn't take long. Some 15 minutes later, I'd learned that the kid was called Jebediah Drizzlefog, Jeb for short, Gillam's son, and a real chatterbox to boot. I'd received a smattering of different information on the people in the village, along with a 60% increase to my local lore skill. Putting aside the lore for a bit, I leaned on the counter and asked, "So, I couldn't help but notice the engravings on the front door. Is there a true story behind that?" His visage soured visibly, and he looked me directly in the eyes and asked, "What's it to you, mister? You a historian of some sorts?" A pop-up surprised the hell out of me. You have been offered a choice for your gathering profession. Chronicler. Where other types of gatherers gather physical material, a chronicler gathers knowledge. Dungeons, taverns, hidden graves, places all over the continent of Ion hold hidden tidbits of knowledge that can grant you gold, items, or lore. The higher your proficiency as chronicler, the larger secrets and rewards are available. Warning: your choice of gathering profession is permanent. Accept or decline. Knowing that Jebediah was waiting for an answer, I disregarded all common sense that I should think a permanent choice such as this through, clicked accept, and immediately told him, quite truthfully, "Yes, actually, I'm a chronicler, and stories such as these interest me very much." His eyes widened slightly. He obviously hadn't expected that, and he seemed to consider whether to just dismiss me or not. "Look, mister, we don't talk about it much. Da don't talk about it at all, though it took place more than 20 years ago. But yeah, it's true. The lady on the engravings was my grandma, and after that bastard killed her and Granda, he gave Da a lot of money and this here bar desk to apologize for what happened, as if that brought things to rights." He smirked, a weirdly adult facial expression on a child at his age, and continued, "He got what was coming to him, though. Grant Callahan made sure of that and talked all them cowards into paying him back." I thanked him and took a pause to think and admire the bar desk again. The flickering of the lights on the bar front were not as distracting in the morning light, and I realized that yesterday I had failed to see the most impressive part of the bar. The bar desk itself was a 3-dimensional portrayal of the village, as it was 20-some years ago, assumedly covered by some transparent material which allowed you to see all the small details. The flickering lights only portrayed the night sky, along with traveling clouds traversing the surface. Sure, as a map it probably wasn't worth a lot today, but judging from the small chance I'd had to peruse the local attractions yesterday, it seemed that not much had changed from back then. A few more houses had been added, the palisade had not existed back then, And of course, there was a 4-story tower on the hill I'd been climbing the day before which had been reduced to rubble. Not much doubt as to where the warlock had lived. The details were incredible, though. Definitely mage-made. I couldn't imagine any craftsman being able to obtain this kind of detail. Looking at the tower, I could almost see the different stories, and... Wait a moment. Jeb, do you have some sort of magnifying glass I could borrow for a second? I asked him. Without saying anything, he reached behind the bar and returned with a small handleless magnifying glass. I was assuredly not the first person to want to indulge my curiosity concerning the landscape. Looking close at the layout of the tower and its base, I tried to pump Jeb for a little more information. Jeb, the engravings outside show the warlock's tower burning with him on the inside and then collapsing. Would you happen to know exactly how that took place? I mean, I couldn't imagine a black-hearted warlock like that just accepting being burned. He cleared his throat.
Sure, mister. I know the stories better than most, I reckon. Old Atoria, the mayor, went along and made sure his spells couldn't help him anything. And then they built a huge fire, and that took care of that. If you want the story done official-like, you'd better talk to old Chertog. He's about the bookiest person around.
That would probably do it, I thought. A skillful summoner with her pockets filled with counterspells to keep any magic shenanigans away, and an angry mob with torches and pitchforks for the rest. I thanked Jeb and went back to my investigations. The only thing that explanation didn't exactly cover was why on earth the warlock wouldn't just wait until the burning had died down and then disappear through the back entrance down by the river, which I could barely discern through the magnifying glass. Curiouser and curiouser, I thought, and was interrupted by another pop-up obscuring my vision. Man, that was getting annoying. I'd better do something about my settings in order to avoid that some annoying skill gain pop-up wouldn't get me inadvertently killed in mid-combat. Fiddling about with the settings a bit, I changed them, making any pop-ups in combat appear only as a small blinking icon at the periphery of my vision. Finished with that, I spent a second cursing the lack of written guides to World of Chains. Sure, it was more realistic like this. There were no quest guides in the real world either, but there sure as hell were a lot of things you only knew from trial and error or spending time immersed inside the game. I had already known that you had the option to choose 2 professions. First, you had your gathering profession, which helped you gather materials for crafting. Skinning for leatherworking, forester for wood, herbalist for herbs, and miner for rocks, jewels, and metals. Second were the real crafting professions, which allowed you to make all sorts of things from skill necklaces to full plate armor. Up until this moment, I'd thought that I had a pretty decent overview of the professions, but this chronicler profession was completely new to me. Maybe it was a recent update, or maybe it was just well hidden for the investigative types to find. Oh, and this suddenly came to me afterwards. If the chronicler profession concerned hidden tidbits of lore, this meant that there was definitely more to this story than what Jeb had told me. Which brought my attention back to the small blinking icon. You have been offered a quest. Digging for old bones. Chronicler quest. You have discovered that there might be more to the tragic story for which the tavern, The Warlock's End, is named. Figure out what happened on the fateful night when Cassandra Drizzlefog was slain. Reward. Unknown. Accept or decline. Ha-ha! Accept! No doubt whatsoever. If this was any indication of what the chronicler class could bring with it, I would probably not come to regret my hasty choice, especially due to how much time I was still planning to spend in a tavern. The odds were much better of me unearthing interesting tidbits in an overheard conversation or plausible truths in drunken storytelling than of me wanting to spend my time arse up in the forest picking mushrooms. Checking out the debuff icon, I could tell that the timer had just about run down to 0, and I went outside to depart on my grand tour of the village. The timer said 9:12 a.m., and I decided to be back in good time for noon. Wouldn't want to start off on the wrong foot with the old bard, alcoholized though he might be. Long story short, I spent the next 2 hours and a bit walking around the village, talking with anybody who looked like they might be willing to spend a couple of minutes chatting with a stranger, not pressing them for all the small details or anything, just trying to get a feeling for the village and its history, inhabitants, and possibilities. Oh, and unfailingly asking them whether they needed help with something. There's nothing wrong with fishing for quests. Coming back from my walk and trying to sort all the information, I was thrilled that I'd had the time to get to know the village better. Of course, I'd gotten a better view of the city, and, to my surprise, I'd discovered even though the village was tiny, all the essentials were here. They had trainers for what seemed like every available class and any profession I could possibly be interested in. There were a number I hadn't encountered, but they were probably out there, in or around the village. Also, the village wasn't exactly brimming with stores, taverns, or the like, but any beginner's needs could be met. The buildings on the town square already took care of most needs: a merchant house to buy whatever you needed, a temple to get your spiritual business in order, the mayor's for legalities, and the warlock's end to relax. At a first-eye glance upon arrival, it had seemed that the rest of Grant's Crossing was populated by shacks and hovels, but honestly, it turns out they were generally placed in the southwest part of town, next to the cemetery. The northwest part housed a sort of barracks/mercenary hangout spot mixed in with more normal housing. The northeast part was dominated by, first, the second largest building in the village, the merchant house, and behind that, continuing several meters out into the waters of the Jagged Rush, the large river bordering the village on the entire east side, was the harbor master's house and boathouse. The southeastern part, behind the temple, was generally dominated by the craftsmen of the village: a smithy, woodworker, fisherman, and others. In the middle of my stroll around the village, I received a pop-up, the answer to my ticket. With bated breath, I read the response from the admins. Dear Mr. Hawthorne, we understand your situation and are willing to help you as far as we possibly can. Please understand that we cannot overrule the KYC, Know Your Customer, or AML, anti-money laundering regulations of another company, just as we cannot rescind on our own policies. For a surcharge, we would be willing to contact your bank and ask for any alternatives that would not require you to put your vacation on hold. If you are interested, please reply to this mail, and we will forward your request to a local representative. Pfft. Disappointed, I let out my breath and scratched the back of my head. Banks were banks, everywhere. Like hell they'd let me get away without turning in the necessary paperwork, no matter how good an excuse I had. Maybe I should contact Jens at the counter and see if he were amenable to helping me out. I'd have to mull it over a bit. Elsewhere, my walk had been more beneficial to me. Apart from a lot of knowledge, and another increase to my local lore, Dawnlight Forest skill, I'd been offered 3 quests in total, which I'd all gratefully accepted. 2 of the quests seemed like pretty generic quests: investigating a disturbance in the cemetery and killing off a couple of feral cats nearby who were getting overly aggressive. But there was nothing unusual about this at all. The quests you receive at neutral reputation tend to be more grindy and not as interesting. But luckily, I'd hit liked reputation with Gillum soon, and with the city within a reasonable amount of time afterwards, and at that point, it'd probably be worth it to ask around again for further quests. At the moment, though, I decided to get started on the 3rd quest, which looked perfect for someone well-equipped for small talk. You have been offered a new quest. What's this feeling? The local priest, Mallard Bullhop, suffers from nightmares and premonitions. This infuses him with a vague feeling of dread which he believes is tied to some local threat or enemy. Investigate further among the inhabitants of Grant's Crossing and discover whether there is something to his fears. Reward: 5 silver, 300 experience points, 500 reputation with Mallard Bullhop. Accept or decline. I was standing in the middle of one of the numerous paths in the village, wondering just whom to approach first, when Providence solved everything for me, in the form of a whistling Athel who was walking towards the town gates. I called out, trotting over to him. "Hey, Ethel!" I said, slightly out of breath from the short run. I seriously needed some more endurance. "Just the rattling I was looking for. Do you have a minute?" He practically shone with pleasure at the chance to chat.
"Oh, I'm not in a hurry or anything. Just need to go into the woods and do a few repairs to a lookout post I've got. It'll keep. What would you like to know?"
"I guess everything," I said with a weak laugh. "I was just touring the village, learning as much as I can about the folks and history hereabouts. I figure since I'm staying here for the time being, I'd like to get to know you all. I've heard all sorts of interesting stuff already, but I still don't know why anybody would build a village in the middle of a huge forest." Ethel barked a laugh.
"That's an easy one. You've seen the Jagged Rush, right? Pretty hard to miss, really."
I indicated that no, I had not missed spotting the fast-flowing wide river filled with sharp rocks 100 meters away. Hell, we could hear the constant murmur of the river from where we were standing.
"Basically, this is as quiet, narrow, and calm as the river gets on its long journey from the south to the north side of the Dawnlight Forest. While she does provide us with food, the Rush is an icy, treacherous bitch. Back when the village was founded, the passage from one side of the Dawnlight Forest to the other was even worse than it is today. No patrols, more monsters, and when you had to cross the river, you'd have to force your own passage. The founders, our original 4, who, in case you didn't know, were the harbor master Grant Callahan, Atoria, our priest Mallard Bullhop, and the old innkeeper, Cassandra Drizzlefog, Leanne guard her soul. Anyway, the original 4 had chanced upon this crossing, which proved relatively easy to navigate. Shortly thereafter, they realized the possibilities in establishing a safe crossing, which could also provide shelter, commerce, and a bit of lawfulness. The rest, as they say, is history, and the village has been growing slowly ever since. I myself arrived with a caravan about 6 years ago, and after a good chat with Atoria, I decided to stay."
I nodded in time to his explanation. It seemed like a smart move from the founders. Being able to profit from all trade that moved east to west and west to east did sound like a guaranteed way to get rich. There was just one thing. Sounds ingenious of the 4. It's a wonder the village hasn't grown any larger, really. Has trade been bad? Ethel shrugged.
Trade's good. It's just the rest. Lots of animals and monsters. Patrols are few and far between, and the road isn't getting any safer. Some choose to take the long way around the forest, even though it's at least 3 times the distance.
I pondered this over for a minute before thinking aloud. Could this be what Mallard was hinting to? Is the village threatened? Of course, after that comment, I had to explain myself. After hearing of the priest's request, he just chuckled.
"Relax, Archie. Things aren't all that bad. I don't know why Mallard's got his panties in a twist. Sure, belts have tightened a bit the past couple of years, but there's nothing here that can threaten the village itself."
While I wanted to question Ethel more on the subject, I could see we were approaching the set time for the rendezvous with Grek, and I thanked him and took off. It was time to go back to the Warlock's End and spend some time with a drunk. Chapter 9. Off to a good start. Back in the tavern, I'd spent a short while trying to improve on the looks of my tattered clothing, and failing horribly, before having a short but pleasant solitary lunch. Now I was wondering whether Grek would even show up or not. He was already a quarter of an hour late. Given his less-than-stellar reputation, I wouldn't have been entirely surprised if he showed up an hour late or not at all. I decided that I might as well spend my time wisely and asked Jeb if they needed some help around the place, received the repeatable quest, "No idle hands in this place," again, and was asked to clean the candle holders and chandeliers all over the main tavern room. I got to work and just made sure to keep an eye on the door. Moving methodically around the room, I'd finished with the candles along 3 of the walls and moved to the 4th, when I noticed a pile of dirty rags stashed at one end of the long bench that was placed alongside the wall. Grimacing with disgust at the smell, Even in a frigging game, some pricks would be unconscionable enough to just leave their dirty garbage in the tavern for others to clean up. I started to pick up the pile, when out of nowhere, it moved. I froze, and suddenly a monster appeared from the middle of the pile with a growl. A small and scaled reptilian head with a long snout appeared, blinking, its mouth gaping wide and showing off several rows of small, sharp teeth. I stumbled backwards, grasping for my short sword, when the creature rose halfway from the bench and spoke.
What? It's noon already?
My brain was apparently unable to function at this point. My ass hit the floor, and I could do nothing but stare uncomprehendingly while the monster continued to ignore me, holding its head in both hands and mumbling. He then yelled,
"Kid, give me some ale!"
Jeb, who apparently knew the creature, dumped a tankard on the bench with a sour look and left again. At this point, my brains decided to rejoin the party. They allied themselves with my feet, and once I had succeeded in getting back to my feet, they were jointly able to convince my gaping mouth to work once again. I cleared my throat loudly. Greg Durzum? I got this note and, well, I've been looking out for you but didn't see you until now, and, you wanted to meet? Greg stood, evidently thought better of it, sat down again, and drained his tankard in one long go. While he did this, I got a better look at him, and, sitting, he was clearly no monster, or at least a humanoid monster. While he definitely seemed a sorry person at the moment and was only about 1.2 meters in height, he was still an impressive sight, looking exactly how I'd imagine a cross between a dragon and a small human. His body was greenish-brown, his snout elongated, and his head topped by a backwards flowing ridge of spiked protrusions running from his forehead and down his back, and seemingly continuing all the way until the end of his long, prehensile tail, which at the moment seemed to help him keep his balance on the bench. His hands and feet were more claws than digits, but would definitely allow for handling tools. His stench was hard to describe, somewhere between cheap drink, vomit, and wet dog, but his facial expression was easily described. The universal, "Oh my God, what did I drink last night?" expression. After downing the ale, he seemed to slowly come to his senses, and he peered up at me and softly grumbled,
"You're still here? Good. Give me another ale, and we'll talk."
I wasn't exactly sure whether his accent was because he was a kobold, still drunk, or because common wasn't his first language, but he was pretty hard to follow. A minute later, I returned from the bar, pushed 2 tankards in front of Greg, and took a pull of my own ale. His eyes flashed in satisfaction, and he took another long pull of the first tankard before he started speaking.
So, you want to be a bard, right?
I frowned and responded, "What do you mean? I am a bard." He snorted.
Piss off, kid. Bards got spells, flash, skills. You got that? No. You know how to play the violin. Ain't no bard, though. Ain't gonna repeat myself again. You want to be a bard?
You have been offered a quest. Bard Class Trial, Entering the World of Song. Greg Durzum has graciously offered to introduce you to the world of bards. Make it through the test in order to advance as a bard. Reward. Variable. Depends on the success. Accept or decline. Accept? Yes, of course, I would love to learn more about being a bard. What should I do? He grinned, quite an intimidating display with the number of teeth he was showing, and his breath, which was downright horrible.
Just follow, and try not to disappoint. You need anything before we leave? No? Good.
I followed Greg's lead and walked silently alongside him as he left the tavern and crossed the town square to the mayor's house, and watched slack-jawed as he told the confused gnome,
Another one for the grinder. get with the portal already, woman. Got work to do today.
To my great surprise, she actually did as he said without any reaction, except for her mumbling under her breath the whole time, and of course she stared at me like it was my fault that he was a rude bastard. A minute and a half later, I followed Greg without any incident through a yellowish, shimmering portal and found myself situated, slightly nauseated but otherwise okay, in the middle of a dimly lit brick tunnel, which I could only surmise was somewhere underground. Looking around, I could spot the end of the tunnel behind me. Looked like the tunnel had collapsed quite thoroughly. Greg right next to me, and a fact my nerves found quite soothing, the return portal right there. A pop-up appeared, stating, "Important. For the duration of the class quest, your respawn location has been automatically reset to your current location. All experience gained will be awarded upon completion of the quest." That meant that whatever I was about to bump into might be lethal, and also they didn't want me to gain a level halfway and find the dungeon too easy. Without any ceremony, Greg dumped 2 scrolls on the ground next to me.
Ought to make you mateless, useless. Now, get. Try not to bore him to sleep, you hear?
Confused, I picked up the scroll and asked, "So, I do whatever it is I need to do to complete the trial and return to you here?" He grinned, a quite disconcerting view showing off his feral-looking rack of teeth, and barked a laugh.
No, you make it outside, or you don't make it at all.
And with this final remark, he stepped through the portal, which shimmered out of existence along with him.